failing wire will fix this and everything.
Yeah, ask the Indians. I think that's when they, all the tech, when you call AT&T, you get these people and all of a sudden the sign goes, that's because some wire snapped and they're going, shh, they're twisting it back together quick. Oh. Listen, my friends, his oil level was too low. His car wouldn't run, and they had to take it down to Mercedes Resnack, and it was like they had to almost trick the computer to get the oil. There's no more there's no dipstick. What's wrong with it? I don't know. Jeez.
There's no dipstick in a car?
Not in this new Mercedes that he had. It's like I go, well.
We are ready to go live.
Okay, very good.
Your hand doesn't fit any there. Yeah, that's when you quit.
It's worth paying the bucks to have somebody else do this.
Take off the wheel over again.
Hello? Hello out there. Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting of Thursday, October 7th. Thank you. We'll start with roll call.
Chair Pevsner,
Here.
Vice Chair Dennison,
Here.
Commissioners Dallas, Hutt,
Here.
Spears.
Present.
Great, thank you. Look over the approval of the agenda, please.
Move we approve as presented.
Second?
Seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Moves forward. And we'll look at the approval of the minutes from September 16th.
I didn't have any comments.
Okay.
I move we accept as presented.
I'll second.
And seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? Nothing. Going forward. Community Liaison report.
Yes.
Mr. Parkhurst? Alderman Parkhurst? Yes. And you wanted to... Go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a quick report tonight. So I just want to tell you guys that it's been a real privilege to be the liaison to the Planning Commission. I really appreciate your guys' thoughtfulness and expertise. We're very lucky to have you volunteering to help the city with your backgrounds and your time. And I also want to say that I appreciate the recommendations you've made on the housing element, the deliberations, the detail you've gone through it. And you sent those to council back in January, and we voted on them in February and sent it to staff to finalize. And at the last meeting, the updated version came back, and you had a real detailed and robust discussion. And I look forward to hearing kind of the continuation of that tonight. But I'd like to really encourage you to recommend the plan to go to council. And the main reason to do that is that if we don't do it, it could result in missing our state mandated deadline. Now, aside from just looking bad and not complying with the law, it's going to result in doubling the cost of developing future housing elements, because we'll have to do it every 4 years versus every 8. But I also want to say that staff and the council heard your concerns, and we take them really seriously. And I think that there's good news, and staff can go through it in more detail, that there are options to address the concerns about third stories through the development of an ordinance and development standards in the upcoming months. So I think we can meet the intent of what you want, but we also just need to meet the letter of the law so that we avoid the state getting any more into our business than they already are. So with that, I turn it back to you.
Oh, okay. Very good. Any questions from anybody on the...
Nope.
Okay, good. Very good.
We have
Any clarification? Yeah.
we have a PowerPoint presentation, and we'll cue that up right now and begin the discussion.
Oh, okay. Well, actually, should we do community input first?
Oh, yes.
I'm sorry. You're doing what I usually do.
I do.
Very good. So at this time, this is the time for community input. This is the time when anybody from the audience and the community can come up and give their thoughts on any issue that is not on tonight's agenda. You have, how many minutes? 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. So anybody who wants to speak on something that's not on tonight's agenda, this is the opportunity to do that. Come on up.
one for each one of them.
There you go.
Hi.
Can I get one for the record? Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, this, okay. Confused at the two.
Was there something
Confused when they
underneath?
said we're
Okay,
two,
just a
and I'm
picture.
trying to find the second one I'm supposed to get.
There's two.
Got it?
One's their plate map. Yep, you got them. Just orient yourself so you can figure out where the east side of that map is. As it comes down the hill, the road narrows and then comes to the Carter Gate and stops.
Good-oak. Go ahead.
Are you with me?
Yes.
I need to make an apology to this group because I spoke to you about this before, and at the time I spoke to you, I didn't know all the information that I needed to know in order to talk to you. That grade coming down that hill is 12%. And so as a car travels down that road going towards the Carter Gate, any car that has any kind of weight to it picks up speed because a 12% grade is a hefty grade going downhill. At the top of the hill, the road is 46 feet wide. As it comes down to the bottom near the gate, it narrows to 44 feet wide. And while the road is narrowing, there is a left turn to get to the Carter Gate. So not only is the driver having to go down a steep hill, monitoring their speed, then they have to turn left and the road is narrowing. When they get to the Carter Gate, Carter is 20 feet wide. Now, the project manager who I worked with for 2 hours on Friday reminded me that we have a new park that's going in so that the people that can't park in Bailey Canyon can park in the new parking lot at the park. So that means you're now adding confusion to cars coming down, dogs, children, and adults trying to cross the road to get into Bailey Canyon, which doesn't have sidewalks. The road is too narrow. So I just needed to let you know, because at the time I last spoke to you about it, I was having a really hard time with Carter even being thought to be an ingress and an egress. But it's so much worse because the road is narrowing, the road is a 12% grade coming down, and now we have the confusion of the people going to the park and coming in if they can't get into the Bailey Canyon parking area. I just felt I needed to let you know because it's a lot worse than I ever thought it was. Do any of you have any questions about those two maps?
I do not, no.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, hello, Philip Yao, 513 Sierra Keys Drive, Sierra Madre. Indirectly, I want to talk about fire and view, okay? I do have some pictures to hand out. It's a rush today. I have to work and come here, so you can pass it around. Likewise, I labeled them a bit. Okay, so you want it, you can pass it around. So I may not be in the specific order I like, but just wanted to share a few of my concerns with you guys. My picture's locked up. Oh, there you go. Okay, I'm at the southern border of Monte Dolorosa. My backyard borders the big vacant field that's just right above me. And what I have is a picture of a sign posted by the retreat center. Of course, they want to protect the privacy and noise and so on. There were times when people walked in the back there, created a havoc literally, and disturb them, as well as, you know, the residents along Sierra Keys. So I want you to see that sign right there. You know, Mater de la Rosa, they do want their privacy. But, you know, indirectly, I want to tell you that because I live adjacent to them, I'm concerned about my privacy. The elevation, as you can see from there, on the various pictures, is significant. Someone in the back literally has full access to my backyard. View, physical access, if, you know, they want it. So that is a concern to me. Hopefully you guys pass that around. And this is kind of unique to the residents on Sierra Keys, okay? And there's a handful of us. I think I probably pretty much speak for them. As far as fire,
Natural fire retardant.
there's a picture that shows the field over there. The field is a natural fire break. I enjoy that just because it is a fire break. My house, as opposed to houses a few streets away, is not rated in the fire hazard area. There are benefits to that, namely insurance, deductible, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? I have a sibling in Glendale who had just had a house she lost her insurance because they, re-rated the area as a fire hazard area. Removing that field will, in fact, put me in jeopardy, physically as well as monetarily, okay? So if you look at it, that field has a certain significance to it. It's wide open. You know, we have herds of deer that grazes over that. It's a natural, cycle of event. And they keep all the vegetations low. Namely, when they keep that low, it gives you a natural fire break. Now, I guess previously people talked about whether that field is used or not. It is used. I live right by it. The sheriffs have been there. They have staged fire equipment right in that area to protect the immediate neighborhood. Okay, I know that for a fact. Okay, so last thing I did talk about view. You can see I just quickly took some panoramic, 3 shots, it's not even a panoramic, of my backyard, which I'm redoing. And you can see on there I projected a line. That line is scaled off of the gazebo for the Virgin Mary there, which is 10 foot high. And looking at the plans that don't really exist, but seeing where there's overlays on there, and projecting two stories, 25 feet thereabout, it would literally obliterate my view. Obliterate, maybe it's not even a good term. It eviscerates my view completely. It'll present a wall of houses over there. And that wall of houses actually replaces the fire break that, the residents along Carter, along Sierra Keys, as well as North Sunnyside there enjoy, that keeps their homes safe. Okay, so it is very important to me. Now, I know we talked about speed of traffic and so on. Having been in town for such a long time, had a couple incidents that happened to my family right at the corner of Sunnyside and Fairview. My wife, she was rear-ended over there, okay? That traffic is horrendous. When I cross it, I have to look 2 or 3 times just to make sure that it is clear. Added to that, the speed element that was just mentioned is just a recipe for disaster. Secondly, and you're going to find this hilarious, my daughter got a new road bicycle and she was testing it out on Fairview, and she was sideswiped literally by a reserve police officer who was patrolling the area. She wasn't injured, but she did have to evade. The bike that was brand new wasn't too new afterwards. Saw immediate scrapes on there. The important thing was that she was not injured. Okay? Effusively, apologizing doesn't do anything. Because it is a reserve or, older gentleman, retired police, we did not pursue any action. Because we do appreciate our police department. Okay? But the fact is, for one family to have experienced a couple of incidents right at that that intersection means something. multiply by the number of residents that we have in town, and you can see that maybe there's been a lot of close calls. Maybe there's been accidents. I can't tell you that. I don't have that data. You guys do.
That-
So I implore you to just go ahead and hear us out. And I prepared those pictures just so that you can see. If you go through Sierra Keys, Carter, and so on, you'll see how obstructed this development could be. And then furthermore,
Can
even
you
more
sum up,
important is
please?
the lossage of the
Excuse me,
of
Mr.
the
Yao.
fire break.
Can you sum up, because you're way over your time?
That's it.
Okay.
That's all I wanted.
Okay.
So generally, it's covered under fire and view. If you don't remember anything I said at all, those
Okay.
are the two key points,
Okay.
okay?
Thank
Fire
you.
and view,
Thank you.
okay? View is probably less important, but the fire is a very important element. The residents in that area, the health and well-being depends on that, okay? Period. I've been through, 2 or 3 major fires in this place already. And I know how bad it could get. And without that fire break on there, you replace it with tinder, fine. Someone should be held accountable when things go up in flames, okay?
Thank you.
And I just want to put you guys on notice for that at this point.
Thank you.
Both about New Urban West plus the general plan that's in here too.
Okay, well, if it's about the general plan, it's probably best to wait until we're speaking about the general plan.
Or the New Urban West.
Well,
That's what they're
yeah, no, I know, but I think if you're referring specifically to the general plan. it should
Judy,
be
you can
on.
split it in half if you want.
Yeah, we
Pardon?
can
You can
split
split it
too.
in half and talk about the part that's,
Well, I just want to come up here once. I don't want to come up here twice.
That's all, I mean, we'll let you speak when the issue comes up, so. Email we got?
That's fine, whichever you prefer.
Oh. This is Judy Whitmore.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate this and the opportunity to speak to this. I am writing about both, the general plan and the new Urban West Monastery as well. And I'm writing this to object. And their project, and I'm sorry I'm reading this, but I haven't been able to memorize it. And their project update of October 2021, they referred to the monastery asking the city of Sierra Madre to restore the plan to build a new community. There wasn't an original plan, and as it is being less impactful, not compatible, not, and certainly not consistent with the original planning rules for Sierra Madre, according to the general plan. They did not do extensive research on the history of Sierra Madre as they said they did, or they would not have proposed this project at all. There is a diverse design, and single levels instead of 2 stories would have been much more desired, as the 47 houses surrounding the project, with approximately 1,500 square feet instead of 1,500 to 3,800 square feet that they're proposing. Respectful of neighbors, light traffic noise, they said 31 trips in the AM, 42 in the PM. What about trips to the market, school, work, visiting friends, etc.? And they're assuming only 1 adult is working. Gee, maybe that would be nice to have that again. And then water. This is a moot point. We don't have water, and prepaying for water won't work because we don't know what the cost is going to be in 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, because we haven't in the past realized how much it was going to go up. And we may not have any water at all. We are in an unprecedented drought, and it only is going to be getting worse. In our general plan, objectives of R12 is an optimum use of water. The area is a high fire risk severity zone, R32 and R33. We need to mitigate the flood and fire in natural open space. Earthquake. We have 3 major fault lines running very near the project. In 1991, the Sierra Madre earthquake destroyed the church on the property and condemned 22 homes and did damage to 403 structures. Trees. The general plan calls for goals and policies for preservation and protection of existing trees. They want to remove over 100 trees, of which 10 are coastal oaks. The canopy of mature trees are important to our health and to the aesthetics for net oxygen. Zone changes can have a serious implication to our town because SB 9 and 10 for more housing that can be built on lots, and the overall impact would be much greater than the report says. Multiply it by 4 or 5. Zone changes can have, well, I guess I said that also, once you've set the precedent, other people will argue that this is something that they would be able to do as well. The ingress and egress is not available for the 2 streets because the Carter Street's only 25 feet wide and must be 30 feet. And if there is no room to add an extra 5 feet to make it legal and safe. The lower level of the property is a natural alluvial fan, and it's needed to protect us from the floods and to put water in our aquifer. Sierra Madre setback from the street is 25 feet, but the project is asking for 20 feet and 5 feet on the side, looking like condo subdivision from the street. Everybody else follows the rules, but they want the rules changed. That's baloney. The lots are too small and will overwhelm the area. All the garages are in front and will look like Orange County with cookie cutter fronts. They're offering 100% electric, but at what price are the buyers willing to pay for that high electric cost? And as we know, that's going up too. I don't want all 100% electric. If I had solar, maybe, but I think I like to cook with gas. So they didn't address the potential pedestrian problems for walkers and the lack of sidewalks in the northwest part of Sierra Madre. There are just too many problems with this project, and we really should deny it. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to say Judy Webb Martin, 93 West Miramonte, and I've been here over 50 years. And that's been something, another story I'll tell another time about the monastery people meeting with us in 95, talking about the general plan, and they swore they weren't going to build there. No, 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 no. And everybody had said, I've seen plans at the end of a year of dealing with them. They were on our committee. They came to every single meeting, and that was the general plan with Bart Doyle, and I'm sorry, I can't remember a lot of the other ones, but at the end of the year, they finally did admit, well, yeah, we have some plans here that we think we'd like to build, but they haven't been up front. I'm sorry. They haven't been honest. I'm sorry, but I think that our people in town need to have somebody that has more integrity than this group of people have had with our town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see. Good evening. I'm Lynn Coleman from Sierra Madre. I just completed reviewing the draft EIR for the monastery project, a total of over 3,400 pages with its appendices, and skimming the SEIR, which is over 900 pages, as well as the staff report and agenda of over 260 pages. So I can be somewhat up to date on these 2 important issues before you. It is really amazing the amount of work and paper generated for a small city like ours to keep up with the regulations and new housing laws recently passed at the state level, particularly SB 9 and 10, that are specifically designed to destroy single-family housing and change our community drastically. It was unfortunate that the housing element issue and the monastery project, EIRs, were released almost simultaneously and shared a common 49-day review period. That made it almost all but impossible for regular working folks to read both, provide meaningful comments, and be able to participate in city matters. This is important because Sierra Madre wouldn't be the community it is today without citizen input. We're all coming out of a difficult time with COVID restrictions the last 1.5 years. Many families were busy trying to work and school from home, not lose their jobs, and stay safe. We haven't seen much of each other during this time. There's going to be a bit of an adjustment period for us to get used to coming to meetings again, and for you, the commission, to get used to us being here. I will acknowledge it's not always easy to conduct a meeting when there's a lot of public comment. After being on a number of boards and commissions, I know it is often difficult to get through the agenda smoothly when there are topics that residents want to comment on. Meetings last longer, and we all go home later. Sometimes agenda items have to be continued. It can be frustrating for everyone. From our perspective, when an important item is to be discussed, It's hard to pull your thoughts together and make meaningful comments in a few minutes. Your time is up very quickly. I do appreciate the opportunity to comment tonight, and I thank you for allowing a return to 5 minutes to do so. I also want to thank you, and I want to acknowledge your work and efforts as volunteers on our behalf. I know that you too were reading over 4,400 pages of EIRs in order to be prepared to discuss and review these documents so you can make the best possible decisions for your fellow citizens and neighbors. Very importantly, I want to thank you for listening to us. I attend your meetings regularly and notice that you don't watch the time clock and you don't pounce on us when it hits 0. Thank you for that, and thank you for not cutting us off in the middle of a word or a sentence. Allowing us to complete our thoughts is very much appreciated. And most importantly, thank you for giving us your full attention and considering our comments. That means a lot. I also want to acknowledge those members of Sierra Madre who take the time to sit down, read agendas, staff reports, minutes, and draft EIRs. I thank them for taking the time and effort to get their thoughts together and presenting them to you on a regular basis. Not everyone is comfortable getting up and speaking at city meetings, and it takes an issue of great importance to bring residents out, stand up, and make their comments known. Our small town works because we have a planning commission willing to listen to us, and we have residents willing to speak up. Let's continue to do our respective parts as we take on the external challenges that face us going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt Bryant, Edgeview Drive. I would just like to remind the Planning Commission how what we call the destroyed meadows at Bailey Canyon got started. First, this project was advanced during a global pandemic when the last thing on people's minds was a housing project. Many people were simply trying to avoid financial ruin and just stay alive. I also remember being in these chambers when the prior city manager gave what I considered to be a sales presentation on the merits of the housing project. The city manager and city staff were already taking a position in favor of the project even before the details were known. The city manager presented some very scary but unrealistic alternatives involving hundreds of units covering acres of concrete if people didn't jump on board in favor of this housing project. The city manager must have known that these alternatives could never have been built and would never have survived an EIR report. Then we had the virtual meeting for the City Council to vote on the Memorandum of Understanding between the city, Madre de la Rosa, and their developer, which would allow a process for the project to move forward and basically allow the developer to get their foot in the door. People were allowed to call in offering support or opposition to the MOU. I was surprised at the number of people who called in to support the City Council signing the MOU. The problem was that when the callers were asked to state their name and city, most of the calls in support came from people living in Pasadena, Burbank, Glendale, San Gabriel, and other places. People who would never have to live with the consequences of a bad project. They were obviously encouraged to call to influence the City Council, and evidently it worked, because the City Council voted to sign the MOU. And finally, I want to mention the city's so-called independent consultant, MIG, that was hired to be the watchdog to review the EIR. Well, it turns out that MIG, while ostensibly working for the city to look out for the city's best interests, is going to be paid by the developer. You can bet that MIG knows who's footing the bill. We also found out through a public records request that MIG had done prior work for the developer, New Urban West. And when MIG brought that conflict of interest to the city staff decided to hire MIG in spite of that. And you all know more than anyone that there is this club that exists between developers, consultants, and EIR preparation companies. They all know each other. No one in the club wants to have a reputation for finding problems with development projects, or they never get hired again. They all have a vested interest in minimizing and glossing over problems to make sure projects get approved. The whole process has been compromised from the beginning. We know that Madre de la Rosa and their developer, New Urban West, are in favor of the project, but it has become readily apparent that the city staff has joined them, and perhaps even the city council. And this is where the Planning Commission comes in. We need the Planning Commission to shine a light on every aspect of this project and look out for the residents of Sierra Madre, because it's quite evident that no one else is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next. Who's this guy?
Hi, good evening. Joe Catalano, 480 North Lima Street, Sierra Madre. It's good to see you all again, and it's nice to be back here, even though I'm on the other side of the. I'm not going to repeat what everybody else has been saying. I just let you know that I am standing with them in opposition to this project, not because I think that there shouldn't be any development there. I want to take away the monastery's rights. It has very, very specifically to do with the fact that this is a cheap, lousy project, okay? One thing that I'm just going to use my couple of minutes to talk about one thing. I'm here right now because it will lapse into the safety issues that I see on the agenda, but it's more of a composite issue than that. The whole zone around the end of Carter and the monastery gate, the entrance to the county the county road up into the debris basin and so on and so forth. If you've been up there, you know that that is just a mess. You know, have to go through chain link fences, through a funny little turnstile. The project is defining itself like inside the gate and like totally separate from the mess that's there. We know that there's one issue about roadway width, and that is that if it's needed as an emergency entrance and exit, the last time I had to deal with a hillside project, and that was in Monrovia, the fire department wanted 26 feet wide. Their standard was that two emergency vehicles could pass each other, or in this case it may be one emergency vehicle and residents trying to leave in the other lane. So the 20 feet is really deficient, but it's only part of a bigger problem there. And that bigger problem is that the project as it's proposed right now has just cut itself off from this incredible little mess that you have. You know, starting from Grove and the entrance to Bailey Canyon Park, all the way over there, and it's kind of like, well, they have their fence, they have their road inside the, and even though they're making use of the road going out onto West Carter, it's kind of like they've turned their back on it. They've totally turned their back on it. And you would think instead of, or maybe in addition to, they're doing their park over there. I'm not even clear whether it's everybody's park or the residents' park, but that's beside the point. I would like to see a real give back here for what they're doing to this city, and that give back would be a comprehensive roadway and landscape design plan that would take that entire messy area, rework some property lines if they have to, make a deal with the county, and significantly redesign that area So, you know, they're going to leave it as a mess. They're going to leave it as a mess, and if we approve it that way, the way it is, as soon as there's a real problem with the roadway width and an emergency exiting and emergency vehicles trying to come in, the city's going to be holding the bag for having to do something about it then. But I wish that we would be proactive about it at least, and not approve this plan until, among many other reasons why, until we see a really comprehensive, good design for that entire area over there. That would be something that the developer could do. That would be a serious give back to the city. Right now, that's just an indication. The way they're leaving it over there, as far as I'm concerned, is just an indication that they're really trying to go cheap on this. And so I hope that you will consider this. We should send it back, among other reasons, for redesigning that area in an intelligent, in an aesthetically pleasing way. And that's all I've got right now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. Great. All right. Anybody?
Good evening, Alex Arietta, Sierra Madre. I wanted to also kind of reiterate and applaud, the residents of Sierra Madre who have been doggedly reviewing thousands of documents, and I think it's frankly I think it's shameful that there was a 49-day overlap in the review period for such significant documents that impact our city in such a significant way. Most people do work, most people do have full-time jobs, and most people have families, and I spent many weeknights, weekends combing through this stuff, and so I applaud our residents who have done that and completed that process on Monday to submit documents and comments to the draft EIR. I think there are some serious concerns, and I won't get into them right now because we'll wait until after the presentation on the SEIR and the safety element. But in terms of the project, the monastery project itself, clearly there's some heavy overlap. And the key points you've heard referenced tonight around huge issues about why this project is all wrong for this city, including water. And we've heard from our own interim city manager a month ago when he was asked pointedly the question, 50 years of water, are you able to buy that water? He goes, no, that water's not available. And he doesn't know when it will become available. And the reality is this 50 years of supply wasn't even priced to be amortized over 50 years. So the whole premise and underlying assumptions around it were faulty. And frankly, New Urban West, shame on them for using this as such a key part of their marketing strategy over the last 12 months, even though there's no factual basis or rationale that can even be a viable option. So we know that water is going to continue to be a big problem, and adding 42 houses does not solve that problem. We know that there's another significant issue that will be discussed around fire and around the safety element, and that will be discussed later. But to reiterate, the proposed site is within 5 miles of where 74 wildfires have burned since the beginning of the historical fire data record. This is deemed a local responsibility area, very high fire hazard severity zone by CAL FIRE, by the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. And our own city policy, which we'll hear about later, interestingly enough, has been significantly changed since our last meeting. But the good policy said, avoid expanding development into undeveloped areas in very high severity fire zones. We're going to hear tonight how that has been severely watered down in a finalized safety plan. Unbelievable, but it has been, or is attempting to be. Traffic, we know that there are going to be significant traffic issues, and you've heard some of those concerns tonight around the issues with Carter. It was interesting as I was reading through the draft EIR to learn more about what is the impact of the construction that's going to occur. what I learned was that there's going to be close to 70,000 trips during a 16th or 18th month period of construction, just from the construction workers. Not to mention the amount of gas that's going to be involved. The area is rife already for serious accidents, and layering on 42 homes and traffic is going to, could make that absolutely catastrophic. You've heard about the trees, removal of 100 trees, including 10 protected oaks. Those trees have been there for many, many years. And you don't replace them with a 24-inch box tree and say that is mitigation, and that's effective mitigation. It's not, and we all know that it's not. Seismic impact. We know that the project is going to have at least three faults right around it. The project is 600, 500 feet away from the Sierra Madre fault. Reading through the draft EIR, this has not been an area that has been studied at all remotely close to comprehensively, and warrants much more significant study and assessment. Aesthetics. Contrary to the precepts in the general plan and municipal code, neighbors immediately adjacent and to the west of the project will have their views, privacy, and value of their properties affected by this project. Despite commitments made by Madre de la Rosa over the years about mitigating the impact, Policy L62 says that the general plan states that any new or expanded structures in residential neighborhoods do not unreasonably obstruct significant mountain or basin views. This project will not achieve that. Finally, there has been an absolute lack of viable alternatives presented in the draft EIR. None. I mean, there's no environmental assessment analysis in the draft EIR, and I read all the pages too, and it was absolutely fraudulent the way they approached alternatives. There are no viable alternatives presented from which any of you can make an informed decision about whether this project is good or not. Last remaining open space of Sierra Madre is destroyed, of course, if this project goes forward. And I applaud Philip's comments earlier to say this field actually is a barrier for all the surrounding residents around that area. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so not seeing anybody else come up. As there is, we'll move on to the community input item. Somebody else want to make a comment on something not on the agenda? Okay, we'll move forward with the public hearing, a review of the general plan amendment 2103. I assume we have a follow-up presentation.
We have a staff presentation. We'll begin with a PowerPoint presentation.
Great, thank you.
Good evening, Chair and Planning Commissioners. We will be reviewing the general plan amendment for the planning period 2021 to 2029 housing element update, including the land use element, safety element, and circulation element, municipal code text amendments, and zone change for the rezone sites, and the certification of the subsequent environmental impact report. This hearing is continued from the September 16th public hearing. We will briefly go over what was discussed at the last meeting. Mr. Curtis Zuccuto of Ecotierra will be providing an update to the safety element and the SEIR. Also, we'll update the municipal code text amendments, and Mr. Phil Burns of the Arroyo Group will be presenting a preliminary massing study. We also have our housing consultant, Karen Warner of Karen Warner Associates, and Richard Gibson and Pat Gibson of Gibson Transportation available for question. Lastly, we'll go over the future scheduled meeting. At the last meeting, Karen discussed the regional housing need assessment that Sierra Madre is tasked to plan for 204 housing units divided into different income categories. We also look at different plan contribution towards RENA, such as accessory dwelling unit, densify selected multifamily sites, and create an option for religious sites to build housing by an overlay zone. And that all end up with a sufficient site inventory. Here is the site inventory map that identified 4 multifamily sites and 3 church sites. All the sites are outside of Measure V boundary. These sites were determined by the City Council with Planning Commission's recommendation at the February public hearing. And it is the city's policy and directive, City Council's policy and directive on site selection and density, which became the basis for drafting the housing element and the environmental impact report that were released for public review and review by the HCD. We also want to address some of the Commission's question on selecting alternate sites to identify more properties, such as adding church sites or sites within Measure V, revising housing element sites inventory at this time will require additional environmental study, recirculation for 45-day public review, and each HCD review is a 60-day review period. The associated delay would likely cause the city to miss the 120-day grace period for housing element adoption. Failure to submit within the required timeline would result in increase of housing element submission frequency from every 8 years to every 4 years. With increased frequency comes with associated cost, staff time, and resources. We also want to discuss regarding Commission's concern on the proposed maximum building height for the multifamily at the density of 30 dwelling unit per acre. Staff has eliminated the proposed building height in the ordinance where it will remain as 2-story or 30 feet. Phil will be presenting a preliminary massing study for those 2 priority sites with the 2-story housing development. Additional comment and edits that we received at the last meeting were updated in the housing element. Those include update with the reference from RP to residential entrepreneur overlay zone. And we updated the projected hearing date for the Meadows project and verified the data in the housing element. We also discussed affordable housing law is planned for housing production at the state level, and housing element addresses local compliances to plan for housing needs. City Attorney also confirmed that there are no precedents of an overlay zone that surpasses the voters' empowerment zone. Now I'll turn it over to Mr. Curtis Zacuto to discuss the safety element and the final subsequent environmental impact report.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. As Claire said, I'm Curtis Zacuto, Principal with EcoTR Consulting. I'll present some information related to the safety element and the final EIR. The General Plan Safety Element Assessment Board of Forestry and Fire Protection, known as CAL FIRE, is clear in its direction to minimize the risk of wildfire in areas that have been designated as very high fire severity zones. Specifically, CAL FIRE has directed cities to include in the safety element, quote, goals, policies, and objectives to protect the community from unreasonable risk of wildfire, end quote. And that's from Government Code Section 65302, Subdivision G3B. The code continues on to state that the goals, policies, and objectives shall include, but shall not be limited to, avoiding or minimizing the wildfire hazards associated with new uses of land, end quote. Policy HZ7 was included in the safety element update to address CAL FIRE's directive seeking to minimize the risk of wildfire in very high fire severity zones. Thus, the following policy was drafted. Objective HZ7, avoid expanding development into undeveloped areas in very high fire severity zones. Staff reviewed the entire safety element update and didn't have any issues with the updated language, including the new objective HZ7. Like all other policy documents, including the CEQA documentation, the documents are initially prepared as a draft, knowing that through the process, refinement will occur. The process being staff review, public review, and decision makers review. At the last Planning Commission hearing, we heard from the public an alternative interpretation of the objective, which didn't quite match our original intent of the objective. Therefore, we determined that clarification was necessary in order to convey the original intent and to avoid any misinterpretations. Subsequently, this objective was further refined to make reference to the city's general plan definition of open space and unimproved land. As stated on page 24 of the general plan, quote, natural open space means undeveloped natural areas conserved for their wild land characteristics, end quote. Some specific instances to help illustrate the refinement of this objective in the city of Sierra Madre include the hillside areas above the monastery, land above Liano Drive adjacent to the debris basin, and the area above Sunrise Hill, which is a private street, which are categorized as open space and unimproved land. To clarify additionally, specifically for the city, this revised objective refers to avoiding new development on land currently unimproved and abutted by natural open space areas designated very high fire hazard severity zones. Note, in the new objective, HZ7 was originally misnumbered and was revised as HZ5. So the revised objective reads as follows, with the new text reading as, avoid construction of new development on land currently unimproved and abutted by natural open space areas and very high fire hazard severity zones. The process for review and revision works, and in this case, we found through the process that clarification was necessary. The revised objective now clearly states the original intent and hopefully doesn't lead to any further confusion or misinterpretations. Next slide.
Hey, are we going to do questions at the end, or do you want to do them as we go?
What would you prefer in terms of our interaction? Would you like to finish what you're doing? Or do you care?
I don't care. I mean,
okay, go ahead, John.
Well, if we could go back to the last slide. I just want to clarify what different places these objectives and goals were. These objectives are not in our current general plan. Is that correct?
Correct. These are new.
These are both new. And so the revision that we see here is from an interim draft that's being proposed to a more recent draft.
Correct.
So none of this is in the current general plan.
Correct.
We're not taking anything away from the current general plan.
Correct.
Okay. And then you talked about we want to revise this to better get the intent. What intent is it that we're trying to capture that wasn't in the prior draft? Because I read these and they read, except for the and abutting to natural open space part, they read, the first part reads the same to me. So I don't understand the language change, and I just want to understand what we're trying to get at by changing
expanding development into undeveloped to construction of new development on land currently unimproved. That seems pretty much synonymous to me. So,
Right, well, I think the intent was also that we wanted to go back and use the language that's in the general plan that identifies what unimproved land is, that the current general plan identifies it. So that's why we took out the undeveloped and wanted to make it more specific to about being abutted by natural open space areas that is identified in the general plan, the current general plan.
So it's definitions.
Yes.
You don't have a definition for undeveloped.
but, okay.
Yes.
But, well, I get the adding the word hazard, because that's just making the term appropriate, right?
Correct.
So that's, I'm totally good on that. I think the first part, to me, I still don't see a change in meeting, so I'm fine. I just don't get the reason for adding and abutted by natural open space areas, because if you have an unimproved land that's in a very high fire safety severity zone, let me get the term right, why is it okay to build on it if it's not abutting natural open space?
Well, it goes back to the intent which was giving the examples of those areas in the city, like the areas above the monastery and those areas that are above the Liaison Drive and the debris basin, those areas. That was the intent, that you don't want to have new development going in that kind of area of the city. That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
So, just to make sure, I mean, to address the issue that's in this room is that there are a lot of people who are very concerned about this area below the monastery. And I just want to make sure that all our terms are correct. By focusing on the word abutting, you are saying that the area around that development area is abutted by other houses and surrounded by houses, as opposed to if you went above Liliano or above Sunrise Hill, there is nothing certain, there's no other development surrounding that. You'd be back into the way Sierra Madre was 500 years ago. And the other thing is, so that seems to rest on your definition of natural open space.
Right.
And you would probably perceive, and I'm just want to get clarification, is that the concept of unimproved. You would perceive the field below the monastery as being improved because it has been a field. It is not the way Sierra Madre was 500 years ago, as opposed to if you went up above Sunrise Hill and you're looking at the brush and the chaparral up there as being unimproved because nothing has touched it, since the last wherever. Am I correct in those?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the idea of then putting new development up in those areas where there's no other development around it, that's putting people at a much higher risk than if you're putting people in an area that's already surrounded by development, and it can be, so.
Then I suggest you may want to come back.
Please, be respectful. Thank you.
Then I suggest you may want to come back and be more specific in your definition of unimproved and abutted. Because I think what you're relying on is the concept that unimproved means that it has never been touched by man or machine. And abutted means that there's nothing, there's nothing on either side of it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Please, you'll have the time to talk later, please. Go ahead, proceed.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. So the draft EIR was circulated for 49 days between August 3rd and September 21st. And note that the statutory requirement is 45-day public review period. The final EIR includes comment letters and responses, revisions to the EIR, and a mitigation monitoring program. 30 comments were received during the public review period of the EIR. However, 16 comments addressed specifically the subsequent draft EIR. Of those 16 comments, only one public agency letter was received, which was from Caltrans, which had no substantive comments on the EIR, and other than that it stated that it supports the proposed circulation element policy L57.1, which related to vehicle miles traveled and implementation of mitigation measure trans-1. The remaining letters were all from private citizens, and all responses to comments were provided in the final EIR to all comments raised. And that concludes my presentation.
Any other questions, Tom? Okay.
Pleasure to speak with you again, commissioners. I get to speak a little bit about a development site planning massing study that we did on the R330 zone. So shifting topics here back to the housing element and the associated zone changes that are required in order to meet the city's RHNA. During the last meeting, there was a significant discussion about whether 3-story heights were really needed in order to accommodate the R330 and the 30 to 34 unit densities that are proposed to be permitted within this zone. You saw during our last meeting how we had done some site concepts for the religious housing overlay sites, and so we proceeded then to conduct a similar exercise on the 2 R330 blocks, which, as you have there, the 200 block of Mariposa and the 491 West Sierra Madre Avenue, the Park Avenue apartments. We looked at each of those under, we looked at the 200, we looked at 2 of the particular sites within the 200 block of Mariposa, 261 and 271 West Mariposa. Those would have a unit allowable density of 16 to 18 units under the proposed zoning. And then the Park Avenue apartments, we looked at it under 2 different scenarios. First, if you were to redevelop the entire site, which would allow for 28 to 32 units. And then secondly, if you kept the existing units but built more into the site, that would be 11 to 15 additional units. And as we did this study, we looked at what a sort of typical rental apartment project might be like, with common open spaces, less private open spaces, typical of a garden style apartment complex, and then did assume some relaxation of parking standards based on the city's already adopted density bonus provisions, which can kick in if some of the units are affordable on the site. So we took an assumption of 1 parking space per unit, and that uncovered parking was okay. That was a key assumption. With those assumptions, happy to show you the results of them. And here's the first one at 261 to 271 West Mariposa. So you can see that indeed, we do believe that a 2-story height limit is sufficient in order to get the required number of units on the site, showing there a 2-story garden style development with an interior courtyard. Sorry, let me go back. Interior. Okay, thank you. With an interior courtyard at ground level, and then parking in the rear. The fact that it is uncovered is a help because you can put it, close to the units themselves without basically cutting off the units from the view. So 15-foot front setback, and then having the second floor flush with the first floor. Currently, the code requires the second floor to be stepped back from the first. I think that you probably do need to allow it to come out to the same 15-foot setback as the first floor. But in general, big picture, 2 stories, it's doable. Next.
Average unit size?
Unit sizes, we looked at 50% 2 bedrooms of 1,000 square feet, 25% studios of 500 square feet, 25% 1 bedrooms, 750 square feet. So those are larger unit sizes than what we assume for religious housing. Religious housing really modeled as affordable, subsidized housing, and this more modeled as if it were to be a market rate project. And then the Park Avenue apartments, again, we see here that it is possible to have a 2-story development there with surface parking and still meet the density that's required. It's showing again an interior courtyard at the ground level, showing keeping the larger setback that's there right now with the landscaping that's there. It is less open space than what the code currently permits in R3. It is a higher FAR than what the code currently permits in R3 as well, but again, the 2-story is doable. And then the final one here is looking at keeping the existing apartments and building around them. So adding 11 new units to the property, a total of 28, which makes it 30 units per acre. Again, doable, right? With 1 parking space per unit, uncovered. You see the open space kind of broken up on the site, removing the current garages and kind of centralizing the parking, making that more efficient. A similar result really to the rest.
A question? Your challenge is to get as many units in on a limited footprint. And I don't know whether it's your examples or you're saying, but there's no setback on the second floor because you would lose that space and you need it to create the units. Is that what is it? So we're looking at designs going forward that do not offer a lot of articulation. Is that correct?
Well, they may offer less articulation than currently, but it doesn't mean that they won't be articulated, that you won't have certain parts of the facade sticking out a little bit more, other parts going back, et cetera. You'll still have that horizontal.
But you'd be very limited because you have limited space in order to create X number of units.
Yeah, I mean, so this was a question posed to us, I guess, in terms of how can we avoid 3 stories, right? So another alternative is definitely.
And I totally get that. You have to create X amount of units. You only have so many square feet on the ground, so you have to do it some way.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I mean, that would be what this exercise would seem to state.
Yep.
Not going to say that there is no way to have.
Okay, that's fine.
To do it. Okay, so this slide actually does not relate to the R330 zone. This slide actually goes back to the religious housing overlay zone that we talked about last time. So these are the development standards that are in the code amendment that you have before you as an attachment to the staff report today. And again, with those, we are needing to achieve a higher density and be able to qualify basically for a tax credit affordable housing project of at least 40 units on each site. So those standards, again, are to allow the repurposing of church parking for affordable housing, to allow the use of the city's existing parking ratios for density bonus projects. That's not a new standard, that's just something by reference. A density of 42 units per acre, a 2-story maximum for the first 40 feet of any street other than Michelinda or Baldwin, a 3-story maximum elsewhere, or we might call this a 2-story maximum above podium parking elsewhere. So that means in the interior of the site as well as along Michelinda, along Baldwin. Allowing off-site parking, reducing the minimum required open space, and then using other R3 standards except exempting them from lot coverage and FAR standards. Thank you very much.
So just to be clear on the 3-story, what you're talking about there is you're talking about 2 stories over parking.
Right. It might be a little bit of a, perhaps minor point for this commission to debate that, would you want to call it 2 stories over parking, or would you want to call it 3 stories? It is Of course, possible at some point in the future that we use less parking or use no parking, and would we rather have a housing unit on the ground floor rather than a parking podium? You know, I think
No, I just want to make sure it's not 3 stories of housing over 1 story of parking. That's
it's
just
yeah.
want to get clear. Whatever we're using in that story, whether it's parking or housing, it's 3 stories. And in your model, you did the first floor as parking because you needed that.
That's
And
right, yeah.
So one of the questions that is before us is whether on this type of I guess it's not officially assisted living, but it's sort of down that range, whether we would allow more parking relief in order to minimize the overall building mass.
Correct. You could minimize your parking standards even more than you've already done. I think that, likely developers, even affordable developers, are going to want to provide some parking on site, even if you don't require it. So I wouldn't put too many eggs in that basket of going too low on your parking standard.
Okay.
I believe that's all.
So we're looking at the upcoming meetings that is scheduled for housing element. It will be 2 public hearing before the City Council on October 26th and November 9th. Staff is recommending that the Planning Commission recommends to the City Council to adopt General Plan Amendment 2103, adopting the 2021 to 2029 Housing Element Update, including updates to the Land Use, Safety, and Circulation Element, Municipal Code Text Amendment 2104, amending Chapter 17.29 of Title 17, and Municipal Code Text Amendment 2105, adding a new Chapter 17.39 of Title 17 of the Sierra Madre Municipal Code. Zone Change 2103 for the rezone sites and certification of the subsequent environmental impact report. And direct staff to continue, analyze, and draft the development standards for the high-density residential zone and the religious housing overlay zone. That concludes my presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
So from a procedural standpoint, I guess I'm kind of having a hard time tracking what happens now and what happens after the fact. So maybe it's Mr. City Attorney, you can help us understand what it is that we're trying to push to City Council versus what we would be revisiting after the fact from the direction to staff.
So if the recommendation is made tonight, that the EIR, the housing element, and those resolutions, so the ordinance for the overlay would be going to City Council. When the City Council reviews it, it's going to have 2 meetings to review it. Assuming that the City Council approves it, it's going to go to HCD for their 90-day review and for their feedback. Assuming HCD approves it, then the housing element is in the clear and the process is done. However, at the same time, staff is going to be working on those design standards that they were talking about to accommodate, I guess, a 2-story development in the religious housing overlay zone. Did I state all that correctly?
Wait, so the idea is that we're going to adopt the zone changes tonight and then we're going to revise them later?
The idea is to adopt the housing overlay zone for the ordinance, correct, tonight? And then the design design specs, basically, or the objective design standards, are going to be adopted at a later time.
Can't we just adopt the housing element and the other general plan amendments and the EIR. And I mean, in the housing element, it talks about we are going to work on these zone changes and not adopt the zone changes now and then just do it once. Because I got to tell you, going back and fixing things later doesn't happen all that much in this town. And if it does, it takes a long time. And I have a lot of concerns with the bare bones nature of these ordinances that, you know, we might get 2 or 3 housing applications before we go back and fix it. And I'm perfectly fine to push those ordinances as fast as we can afterwards. But as people have said, there's thousands of pages of documents. And I really feel like this has gotten tucked in on page 387. Hypothetically, I don't know what page number it is, depending on which one you're at. But and other things that we've done like this, we've really reviewed, and we've got a lot of community input focused on that. And so that's my big question, is whether we can take that part out and say, let's do this later, maybe even in a month or two, but move the part that HCD really needs us to get done on this schedule and do that right now.
Commissioner, I think that's possible, but we'll need to confirm with our housing consultant whether we can actually push forward the housing element without the ordinance itself. So if Ms. Warner would like to opine on that.
Yes, I don't know, is this on? Yes. You could decide to delay adopting the actual rezoning. You would adopt the map showing the properties to be rezoned, but the zoning text amendments, you would need to adopt them within 1 year. There's a brand new bill that changes rezoning from 3 years to 1 year. But that is acceptable.
So if I can just say this back and make sure I'm understanding this.
Please.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, we can we can recommend the housing element, we can recommend the new religious overlay and pass that to city council, and within a year of HCD accepting, which could take up to 90 days, within a year of HCD accepting our plan that gets submitted, we would then have to have revisited and ensure that our zoning matched what we said it would.
It's actually 1 year from the start of the 6th cycle housing element, so it would be October 15th, 2022.
Okay, but we have a year to come back and get those right.
Yeah.
A year and 8 days.
That's an additional week that I hadn't calculated.
Okay. Can staff stipulate to that?
Certainly, we could come back within that time frame. I think we would have to make this a priority to keep this moving forward.
Well, I mean, we understand that we're not trying to put the city in a bind with HCD because of, you know, not adopting something sooner, but I think the point is correct that there's some work that needs to get done. And we're sort of pushed against expediency and efficiency and thoroughness. And I'm trying to find the middle ground here.
Yeah, because it seemed like there were, if we put our minds to it, even some ways that we could avoid third stories by lessening parking surcharges.
Right.
So that we can,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the good fight, I think we all, I won't speak for any of you. The good fight I would like is to try to keep 3 stories to a minimum where possible. And it seems like that's something that we could achieve after the fact, still be able to achieve it, and still get HCD to sign off and keep this 8-year cycle, so that whatever board is sitting up here at that time will be able to handle the next housing element. Which I'm sure it'll still be you, John.
And I think the one thing that we have going for us is that some of the stuff is aspirational. We're telling the state that we have set aside the following places in the expectation that they may be, but it's not as if they are eminently happening. But given the pace at which the state passes laws about housing and the fact that things could change, I think that we should at least give HCD what it needs and then move on it so that we have something in place to protect the town.
Yeah. Those were my questions, so if we need to go to comments, if there's not other questions, I have public comments.
That was my question too, so, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Good, okay. Good. So this is the time we'll open up to comments. Anybody in the audience can come up and speak on this issue.
Good evening. My name is Tricia Searcy, and I'm going to cut right to the chase due to time constraints. The housing element in SEIR is a flat-out fraud on the city. In addition, it's completely divorced from reality. The city has cavalierly disregarded the comments and concerns of residents. Even though the city has a legal obligation to respond to comments from the community, it has failed to do so. You can have a look for yourselves. The environmental impact report is a stunning betrayal of the community on so many fronts. I can't address them all in the time I have, so I'll highlight a few. The environmental impact report fails to address the impacts of the two largest developments in Sierra Madre history, the Meadows at Bailey Canyon and the Stonegate projects. It's scandalous. The report identifies the projects as pending/approved, but then says they are included for informational purposes only, saying that for the environmental analysis, they will be part of the future environmental baseline. What does this mean? I asked and the city refused to answer that question or any of my questions. So what I take it to mean is that the city is not including these projects in its environmental analysis until the damage is already done, and then it will include them as part of the future baseline. It's a complete abrogation of the responsibility to address the environmental impacts before they occur. Another tactic the report takes is to pass the buck and say the draft EIR EIR for the Meadows project. First, answers need to be included here in this analysis of our housing element and general plan. And second, you can't find answers in that other report either. So crucially important environmental impacts are not addressed here, nor are they addressed there. I know because I read the over 4,000 pages of both environmental impact reports and the appendices, and I took the time to comment on them. I did so because I couldn't believe what I was reading, and I felt obligated to do something. The city apparently feels no such obligation because it has chosen to ignore my comments and those of countless other residents. But wait, I'm actually wrong about that. The city didn't ignore all comments. It took some of our comments and used them against us to promote the interests of New Urban West, the developer of the monastery, taking the developer's side over the safety of our community. The city has changed important safety policies that were getting in the way of New Urban West, who is apparently the new sheriff in town. New Urban West is now determining what will and will not be included in our town's safety element, and what environmental risks all residents will be forced to bear so that it can get the biggest bang for its buck in the last open space in Sierra Madre. It's truly outrageous. So let me set the stage, and please bear with me, because I think I can shed some light on what happened with regard to the fire safety policy that was discussed earlier in the meeting. In Appendix B of the newly revised housing element, it states that the monastery has been included as a pending project so that its potential environmental impacts may be evaluated in conjunction with other sites. That would be great, except, as I just said, the problem is that's not what's happened. The environmental impacts are not evaluated here in conjunction with the other sites. Obviously, they should be, but they're not. It's not in there, okay? Nevertheless, the monastery project is called a pending project for a very sly and very specific reason. The project conflicts with the proposed policy in the safety element of avoiding development in very high fire severity zones. And this was brought to the city's attention by concerned citizens. How did the city address these concerns? It changed the safety policy to kowtow to the monastery developer. Rather than address the severe fire danger posed to the community, it changed our safety policy. The final EIR says, Attachment B clarifies the safety element to address existing development applications along the edges of the city. That's the pending monastery development. The city changes the policy of avoiding building in high fire severity zones to exclude existing development applications and pertain only to, quote, new development on land currently unimproved and abutted by natural open space areas and very high fire severity zones. This is a dishonest and dangerous game. There is no possibility of any such new development if the monastery project in this very high fire severity zone is allowed to go through. There is no more open space. There is no more land. So when they're talking about this new development on land currently unimproved and abutted by natural open space, they're talking about that project, that specific area. Now, I had a meeting with the city manager, the city attorney, and the director of this planning commission, along with residents Barbara Velchero and Alex Arrieta, in which we discussed our concerns about this fire policy. Our city representatives said they were unaware of the policy. So Barbara gave each of them a copy at the meeting. Subsequently, the city manager wrote to me and said he still couldn't find it and asked if Barbara could please send it again. She did send it again. And what happened next? Instead of addressing our concerns over the severe fire hazard posed by the project, they changed the city safety policy for the benefit of New Urban West and at the expense of our safety. New Urban West, the monastery developer, is apparently now the one who tells our city leaders what to do. These city leaders took information from concerned citizens and used it against us to help this one big money developer. That's wrong. It's just wrong, and it's just one example of New Urban West calling the shots around here. The residents of Sierra Madre deserve leaders who are looking out for us, looking out for our safety, and not being led around by the nose by one greedy, overbearing developer. The future of our city is in your hands. Please, don't let this happen. Wake up. If you haven't read these reports, please look at them, really read them. I strongly urge you not to recommend certification of this SEIR or the general plan and housing element update. Please send it back to be done right. There's a lot of important work to be done. Residents deserve that much from our city government. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Claire McLean, and I am reading this for Deb Sheridan. She could not be here tonight, and she asked me to read this to you from her. Good evening, Commissioners. And Deb Sheridan, she lives on Val Vista Drive. I'm sorry I cannot be here tonight to speak at this extremely important meeting. I have several concerns. The city paid this consultant $250,000 for what? Her idea is to change our general plan so that it will be okay to build 69 luxury homes in 2 high fire zones. My question to you, Commissioners, is what if you and our City Council approve this? It is not a question of if there will be a fire, but when. Now, say one or more of those luxury homes burns down and there is not sufficient way to escape, someone dies. Who is responsible? Possibly who gets sued? Ms. Warner, the city council, you, most of you on the commission have children. Could you live with that result? This is not idle speculation as global warming increases. The number and intensity of fires all over California are increasing. I'm pleading with you to not do this. Also, I'm wondering if you can even vote on this part tonight. As I attended the last meeting, the consultant talked about a church overlay zone to defy again our general plan and to build 3-story apartment buildings on church properties. I have not had a chance to double check this, but there is speculation that the church pastors are not agreeable to this idea. In addition, every time there was a question about our crazy RHNA numbers, and what about the proposed 42 houses on the monastery property, we have been told those don't count. My question to you, Commissioners, is have you seen a letter from the heads of the 4 church properties to verify that this would be okay. We Sierra Madres have survived our managed slow growth, whether we liked projects or not, but we will not survive a change to occur to our general plan. In conclusion, I would like to add that it took hundreds of residents, business owners, city employees to design and implement the general plan update, which took over 5 years to complete. The general plan, the constitution of the city. Thank you. And again, that's from Deb Sheridan. Do you want this? Sure. Thank you.
Dave Beach, and I live on Auburn. I want to reiterate what the earlier speaker said on the draft SEIR. Judge Learned Hand said years ago, no one word is superfluous when reading things. A couple words, when it said avoid expanding development into undeveloped areas and very high fire severity zones, and it was changed to avoid construction of new development on land currently unimproved and surrounded by vacant open spaces in very high severity zones. Well, I guess since we're hearing that this is a pending development, so it would be a loophole big as a fire truck to drive through to allow these two developments to go forward. And I would reiterate that Bailey Canyon sure looks to me like to be a very much severe fire zone, and it's adjacent to this thing. So putting wording in here surrounded, when you've got the city below to the side, then all of a sudden it's not surrounded anymore. But I think Bailey Canyon is quite severe fire zone and quite adjacent. So I don't know how we could approve this tonight like that.
Hi, Joe Catalano again. I just want to interject before I talk about what I'm really going to talk about, is that if we go back to basics, go back to fundamentals, that the purpose of general plan is that the stakeholders, the residents in a given municipality, make the decisions about their planning direction, and that it is not determined by outsiders. Okay? It's way over here. Now we're way over here, and I hear nothing but word games and bamboozling now. This is ridiculous. We need to back up to the point where we get back to the fundamental idea of general plan, and that is that we, the residents and the stakeholders, decide the direction. Okay, we're so far away from that, everything I'm listening to tonight. But anyway, what I really wanted to talk about for a minute, let me speak as some of you know that I am an adjunct professor in urban and regional planning out at Cal Poly Pomona. So I want to talk about this housing proposal that I just saw here right now. I don't think it's the right idea at all. There's a phenomena going on in what's happening with cities called the donut hole. And that is that the commercial area in the center of town is weakening while things are getting more dense around it. And when I was on the commission, of course, we worked for other reasons to avoid having to push the commercial out or densify or destroy hurt the low-scale residential that it kind of surrounds a lot of downtown. So I'm really wondering why the prognosis, our commercial area from the standpoint of land use is really weak right now, and the prognosis is post-COVID that it's going to continue to get weak. There's a lot of retail that may never come back at all, and we're talking, and so it's starting to look like missing teeth. And and this is exacerbated by the fact that Bank of America just pulled out, right? It's a really good site. We really should be looking at what the form of downtown is and how it isn't going to be, all halcyon commercial and retail anymore. That's probably just not going to happen at all. And maybe we need to be looking at more mixed use. We need to be looking at where residential can come back into the picture in that area. All right, there used to be a lot more residential within our commercial area than there is right now. Now, I'd like to shift into something else. In the past, there are two ways that you can put proposals out there, and two ways that you can do things. And one way is that we've seen it here in the past, that when you just put a proposal out without any strict design considerations, that what you start getting back from developers is what's economically most feasible to them. And for this kind of housing, what's economically most feasible for them is, and that affects their competitiveness in the proposing process, is a standard with a level of parking and then 3 levels at least of housing up above, and the kind of struggles that's created in the city in the past, where people have just thought that it was way too big. There's a better way to do it, which is gaining a lot of popularity in a lot of planning circles, and just talk about it briefly. It's called form-based zoning. And that means that instead of so many words and talk and numbers and all of that, that we, the city, actually would look at downtown area and we would plan what the form wants to be in terms of what's the shape of buildings as you're approaching the city, coming up Baldwin Avenue. What does it look like along the boulevard, so on and so forth. And before any proposals are requested, that we have agreement about what the kind of physical form is that we want to have in the city. And I would like to suggest that we find a way. There are very good consultants out there who specialize in form-based zoning, and one of the very best anywhere is based right in Pasadena. I'd suggest that we start looking at this and see if we can use the housing to strengthen the form of downtown, which otherwise is going to continue to get weaker and weaker and weaker, I think, and not destroy all of or any of the lower income, smaller scale houses that we have immediately surrounding downtown. So I'm talking about something much longer range, but for starters, I'll say it one more time, and that is that I think that the proposal we saw tonight for the massing of housing on those projects is really no good, and we just shouldn't do it. And hopefully we'll have the opportunity to start looking at form-based zoning as a way to help reshape downtown and avoid these other problems. Thank you.
I just have a few minor comments. I'm Susan Newhausen. I live at the top of Grove Street, so right near the proposed project. So I just want to make a comment about the change in the safety language. I mean, it's to me somewhat disingenuous that wording was changed basically to make it okay to build in a very high severity fire zone. And I agree, it's a budding Bailey Canyon that's not developed. I've never seen houses in Bailey Canyon. And to me, unimproved, and I think people think of unimproved, the area, it's not stubbed for electric, there are no sewers, et cetera. That's generally the definition of unimproved. That it's never had any bulldozer on it, I think is really an extreme definition. And I really think the bottom line is that one shouldn't be building in extremely high severity fire zones given global warming, the fact that we're in severe droughts and there's not going to be water. The second thing I really sort of want to comment on is the housing unit plan. So, which other people have mentioned, it says pending projects, the Meadows, existing zoning. Well, we've been told by the city attorney, the mayor, the city planner, that this isn't a pending project. I mean, to me, the word pending means that something's already been put in and you're waiting for approval. We had been told that this was a proposed project and that nothing had actually been submitted yet, that all this background needed to be done, even though there was the memo of understanding. That just made it so they could submit a proposal. So the fact that this says pending either means that we've been lied to and that this actually is a pending project, or if it's really proposed, it should state proposed. And given that this plan is really to deal with affordable housing, and if you look across, both the Stonegate and the Meadows are above moderate, like way above moderate, and they actually are already additional to what the RHNA says, I would say take it off this project, take it off this sheet. What's it doing there? It's not adding any benefit for what's needed, and it's actually suggesting that this is already a done deal. And then, okay, a few more minutes. So what I really ask for you as the Planning Commission, and maybe this is a little off topic, is consider this as a proposed project and not a pending project that the city is trying to ramrod through. And, and please pay attention to the concerns of the residents, and I really feel like you all are doing that. And I think it comes back to that whole thing of even where they say existing zoning, the pending Meadows project. I think it's the Planning Commission that should be determining that this is currently on institutional land and that residences should actually be on land that's zoned residential. This whole idea of the specific plan, it's really only benefiting the developer and not the needs and wishes of the residents of Sierra Madre. The specific plan, as you all know, supersedes the general plan, and I think that's really problematic. They've already demonstrated in their examples of the homes, which are actually oversized for the lot, at least based on the general plan. And so again, I really wish that you would consider the zoning of it, the whole scope of the project, and that it's proposed and not really a pending project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Phil Yao, just returning a couple of comments. I do agree with the lady that just came up first for the second round of comments. My comments on the draft SEIR is that it was actually fairly poorly written. It sacrificed quality for quantity. Okay, that's my assessment of that. Too much boilerplate, too much jargon. And I just wanted to confirm with, that what she said is correct. These are all these documents that try to saturate us, okay? Confuse us, obfuscate the real, direction we're supposed to be going. Okay, I'm sorry. Now, a second thing is, I heard that there was a citation from Caltrans, and there indeed was. It was from, just bear with me a minute. It was from Maya Edmondson, who is the branch chief for IGR Seeker. And she wrote to Mr. Vincent Gonzalez. Fairly direct, she said that she commented on the project. Currently, the project is designed in such a way that induces a high number of trips per household due to being exclusively large lot, single family residential. Because there are many things, there are a few more things that she addressed. Personally, I do have to add that, adding that volume of automobiles They're going to be started in the mornings throughout the day, which we all know is probably the highest pollution period during the cycle of an automobile operation. It really does affect the health and well-being of the surrounding neighbors. Okay, few things that, you know, aside from that, I'd like to have some clarification. I heard words like recommending adopting this, et cetera, but yet I heard people asking, let's clear up the wordsmithing of this field area below Mata del Rosa, okay? How does that all play out? I'm confused as to the overall process. We have questions, and then we have staff, recommending adopting. Then we have the gentleman that presented it, and we all know that there's a certain amount of wordsmithing that had taken place, okay? And what does that do? That seems to funnel in the ability to develop that property. That's my, understanding of it. Maybe the city attorney should advise us. What should that say? If you guys are hard, have your heart into that and really support the project, it shouldn't be wordsmith like it was, to dance around it, to say an abutment of empty spaces or whatnot, It should just say, hey, we go for this project, okay? This zone, this is going to be rezoned over there. And if you really truly feel that way, then it should really say what it says. Not exactly what I heard, which is a lot of mumbo jumbo that didn't exactly determine what that fate of that, well, it does in a way, but trying not to say outright what the fate of that field is. Okay, I've heard quite a bit, and so that's my question. With the questions that come about for that, how does that affect the staff recommendation? Shouldn't it put a hold on that? I heard from the gentleman about all the nice rendering and the internal courtyard. Well, I've seen big buildings where it goes from street to street and they have an internal courtyard. I always would think that, hey, wouldn't it be better to have the open space on the outside and all that big garbage building behind there so that it's less obvious? Don't know, but I'm not an architect, so I don't know about that. It seems like that we're hanging a lot on the limited parking, one car park per household, and I'm hearing that we have two, bedroom units and so on. Where are the extra cars going to go? I really don't know. I mean, you guys are the experts in that, but who's going to be parking where? I know that as a safety rule, we have to pay for a permit to park in the street. Does that mean that, this affordable, area is going to require people that need their money to pay for a permit to park on the street? And will the street have as much parking that is needed? So the one car thing I've got questions on. And just a repeat, with these questions that you gentlemen have asked, how does that affect the recommendation? I mean, it seems like I do agree with Mr. Hutt. I think it was you. I can't see who was speaking. That's the problem. But, he didn't want to kick the can down the road. Let's address it, or, just partially put things that can be recommended to be approved only, and only that. And so, the portions that had to be cleaned up, relative to the wordsmithing, I'm totally confused as to when people say, let's adopt it, let's accept it. What does that really mean? There was a whole litany of things that was listed that says staff recommended approving that. Okay. I'm critical in what I read and try to comment on, and I'm not used to all this verbiage, thousands of pages. Maybe it's the state that drives us to that. I don't know, but the fact is, for a newbie, for person that's not done this before, it just looks like that there's a massive amount of obfuscation that's taking place. Typically intended to snow individuals like us, and I don't like it. You know, I don't like to be snowed, please. And I know you gentlemen volunteer, you know, I'm just imploring that you take a keen look at it. Don't let outside influences ruin what we have in Sierra Madre. You know, the general plan, as much as it had problems before, was very heavy on emphasizing, you know, the way of life in Sierra Madre.
Okay.
You moved here for a reason. I hope that you can hold on to it. And let's not get, you know, let's not get big business out there influencing, you know, what you guys, you know, perhaps, I'm not overextending, but what you guys hold dear to you for the community that you live in. Okay? That's all I have.
Thank
So
you.
I hope that you guys can clarify some of my lack of knowledge in it.
Oh.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Alex Arietta, Sierra Madre. First of all, thank you, Planning Commission, for hearing all these comments. I know it's a lot of information to process. I want to talk just about two things. I think we all agree that the most important thing is to do things right, right? And I think that what we've seen tonight with this SEIR is it's fraught with a number of issues and complications that need to be addressed before it's submitted. I think, you know, I heard staff say, well, what's the issue if it's delayed? Well, you know, we'll face some challenges. We'll have to submit our plans on a more frequent basis. Staff costs, staff time. I was in a meeting with the city attorney a month ago, and we were talking about PRR costs, and he was saying, you know, the city had to pay $1,000 for all the PRR requests you're putting in. And I said, so what? I mean, I'm a resident of the city. We're trying to get down to ask for information that we need to evaluate the draft EIR, evaluate the project, and all we get is pushback. So we have to continually put in these PRR requests. Do I care about $1,000? Okay, yeah, I do, like everyone else does. But it's minuscule relative to the scope of this project. And I was taken aback by that. And we hear city staff tonight saying, well, there'll be further delays, there'll be staff costs. And with all due respect to Councilman Parkhurst, who wants to submit it and get it ready and nice and tidy for city council next week, I think we're far from that. And I think that the discussions tonight have shown that. So I want to talk about two things. One is the fire element, safety element, and you've heard enough discussion around, I don't need to repeat it in terms of what the initial objective was and how it was changed. However, there is one thing that still is intact in the 2015 general plan. Includes the following policies. Policy R32, ensure that wildland open space, including the areas of the city designated as high fire, high hazard severity zone, is left in its natural state, with the exception of brush abatement or public safety in order to aid the city in fighting fires. Policy R3.3, ensure that natural open space within the high fire hazard severity zones remains undeveloped so as to mitigate the flood cycles that follow wildland fires and natural open space. Not sure if those two policies were missed somehow, but they're still valid. They're still in place. And it seems that with what Tricia had shared earlier in her discussion around the new draft saying the city changes the policy of not building in high fire severity zones to exclude existing development applications to particularly favor the monastery development and to allow that process to go through, which is hugely problematic. And you read verbiage like that, and you begin to say, who should we trust here, right? And who has our best interests in place? It's really common sense. When you think about the revised policy that the consultant spoke about tonight versus the existing policy that was in place in draft, the reason why the public residents were in favor of it was because it was protecting the residents and putting that above the safety, putting that above the dollars that the developer would make. It's really common sense. This is the safety element. Which would be more dangerous to our people and to the city? Houses that are packed together and surrounded by other older, more vulnerable houses, or a lot in the middle of nowhere with no houses around it? I think number two is safer, right? Number one is what New Urban West wants to do. They want to build houses surrounded by, a bunch of other houses that are older and more vulnerable, and will result in huge safety risk. Okay, last point is around the housing element with the churches. I just have a very specific question around that, and it has to do with the 4 churches, because there has been a lot of back and forth around whether the churches have even agreed and whether they even want to do that. So a specific question for, maybe it's a planning director, but has anyone specifically asked the churches, do you want to do this or not? Do you want to be included in the housing element or not? Because someone apparently asked a monastery, and they said, no, thank you, we don't want that. We don't want to be a part of it. However, so that's a question I have. I'm not sure if the planning director can answer that or not right now. Is that something that's possible or no?
If you'd like me to respond.
Yeah, if you want to, go ahead, just real quick. But you got 26
We
seconds.
invited via Zoom all of the churches who we identified to participate in the conversation and the dialogue with a nonprofit organization that supports affordable housing, and also the Arroyo group with Phil Burns. So we had that dialogue with them, and then we had site visits with those who wanted to continue to participate. There were more than the 4 sites that were originally proposed. St. Rita has actually asked us to remove them from that list, so they're no longer on the list. So we're down to 3 sites. And we shared some of the massing studies with them as well once they were fully developed. So we've had communication with them, yes.
Okay, because
They've all expressed concerns as well.
Okay, yeah, in fairness, because we have, one of our constituents who, Jim Watson, who I don't think was here tonight, but he has spoken directly and has an email from 2 of the 3 churches still who are in the religious overlay zone, and told them they had no intention of building, and said they had communicated that to the city. So my point is how can we submit something that clearly has some big question marks around the validity of that, big question marks around the safety element? So I think, in my humble opinion, it's far from being complete, far from being ready. And candidly, after it goes into the 90-day review, when that process is started, I think there's enough concern around this that you're going to have a number of residents who are reaching out directly to the organization who's reviewing it, expressing concerns and doubts about how this process has been handled. And I think that can result in some not very good results and outcomes for the city. So as I started, the most important thing is do things right. And we trust the Planning Commission. We appreciate your efforts and your thinking on this and your thought and your partnership. And we just ask that it's done right, particularly not rushing through this and giving it the appropriate level of deliberation. Thank you again.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Lynn Coleman. I just wanted to ask a quick question to follow up on the gentleman that was just here. You mentioned, one of you, that there was a 90-day review period by HCD. What happens if they don't like what's being submitted and they turn it back? Are we in real trouble then? Does the clock start all over? I mean, if they find out some of these inconsistencies and they verify things that are not correct in the EIR, what happens to us? Does anyone know?
Yeah, we'll answer that question. Alex, you want to respond right now, or you want to the procedure?
Chair President, would you like me to respond to questions as they're asked, or would you like me to respond to your questions at the end of the?
Yeah, we'll ask that later, but we'll wait till everybody's done, and then we'll try and collect the questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rather than getting a dialogue. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for taking my comment. My name is Deirdre Murphy. I'm not very good at this, so bear with me. I just want to say that I disagree with the request for City Council to approve an updated general plan. It's premature. It does a grave disservice to all the people that I've seen here tonight who have worked so diligently on the general plan, hours and hours of their time. So please take that into consideration. Number 2, for the HZ7, the language change to suit the agenda of the developers is alarming, and the language is unctuous, and it's a bit insulting. I was going to say more about the high fire zone, of course, the fault line, and the water and the drought, but I started looking at the wording and thought, high fire hazard zone, it kind of speaks for itself. So does the fault zone. Don't think we have to, living here as residents, understand how petrifying it is. That first smell or whiff of smoke that we have living here, you know, and the amount of feeling and heart and pain we go through even thinking about it, and this development and what it would do. The last thing I'd like to say is the net zero water usage proposed by New Urban West is no less than insulting. What is that? What is the verge? You know what it is? It is pure jabberwocky, and it is insulting for all of us who read the paper every single day about the horrible drought that is going through in California. So thank you for taking my comments, and please do not let development win over what is so beautiful about this small city and what's disappearing about this small city.
Thank you.
Hello, council members. My name is Kathy Watson. I live at 150 South Baldwin. You have my comments, and you've probably seen what my husband and I submitted. But I've heard our name mentioned by one or more persons, so I thought, you know, perhaps I should just say just a couple things. I am opposed to the nature of the development in the religious housing overlay zone. I call it stack and pack. It's so huge and massive. I don't think it's appropriate for our city, and I think I know the state has put these ridiculous requirements on cities, and you have to deal with it. But I think it would just be so much more appropriate to try to do the developments throughout town with you know, smaller projects that blend into our community and just don't stick out like a sore thumb. And the reason I reached out to the pastors was because when I looked at what was being proposed and I felt it was so massive, I thought, why would anyone agree to this? And then I had the thought, well, did they agree? And so that was why I reached out to the pastors, and both the pastor of Christ Church and Bethany Church said that for a number of reasons it was not feasible for their church. And one of the important reasons, and they used the word feasible, I thought that was interesting, they used the same word. And I have the emails if you would like to see, so you know it's not just gossip, it was direct communication between the pastors and myself and my husband. But the concern that they voiced to me, as well as saying it wasn't feasible, was because they have children on campus every single day. And I relate that to one of the provisions that would be in the zoning code, which says there could be permitted transitional and supportive housing. And particularly Bethany Church, because I went there for 22 years, there, you know, the school is there, the big huge parking lot, they use that sometimes for activities with the children, and it just seems totally inappropriate to me. And so thank you for hearing my concerns.
Thank you.
My name is Heather Allen, and I live on Grove. I'm a 49-year-old resident. That's right, I'm 49, and I've lived here 49 years. I wasn't planning to say anything, but I was listening to the presentations tonight about the housing unit plans, and it's really sad looking at those pictures of possibly what we could be facing on I think it was Montecito or Mariposa and Sierra Madre Boulevard. As well as living on Grove, I'm very familiar with what's going on with the monastery. And I learned a lot by listening to the residents' comments. And I just want to tell you that it leaves me with a really heavy heart to see the possible permanent changes that are going to happen to this town that I loved, that I grew up in. what's the old saying? You lose your landmarks, you lose a piece of yourself. And I think that's what's happening to Sierra Madre. And I'm opposed to it. I'm opposed to the stack and pack. And of course I'm opposed to the monastery project. And I'm all for honesty and integrity and keeping this town the way it is. And I hope that you can do your due diligence in speaking for us in that matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Do you guys like to take a break and come back before we? Wait, somebody coming up? Never mind.
Good evening again. I'm Nancy Beckham, and I live at 337 North Lima. 13 months ago, the Bobcat fire broke out. And I, for one, watched the fire trucks go up and down Lima as fast as they could go to try to put that fire out. It was 2 weeks of a lot of very scared and nervous people, a horrendous amount of work for our own firefighters, helicopters landing on the monastery open field, and a lot of scary stuff that started here and then branched off and was finally stopped on December 17th. Our firefighters made a stand at Mount Wilson when that fire got so close to the building that the paint bubbled. I, for one, do not want to put our firefighters in that situation. And I am frankly amazed that someone could take the safety plan that was done in the general plan and tweak the wording to make sure the monastery development got squeaked in. I know this is called a specific plan, and I know none of you really know who I am, but I taught school for 42 years, and I always taught my children in the classroom to be honest and truthful and do the right thing. However, this thing from the get-go, I would have called collusion. You call it a specific plan. And every time I've turned around and lifted up a rock or tried to figure out how to attempt to get my point of view, the more I got into it, the more upset I became. I spoke to you early on today because I realized how worse Carter was than I even understood. I knew it was a terribly high hill. I didn't know it was a 12% incline. I didn't know they actually were taking the road and making it smaller as it got towards that gate. I knew they were going to open the gate to a 20-foot wide road. But this is so much worse. And you know, we all read in the papers about a town called Paradise. It was in Northern California. And Paradise, because it was beautiful and then it had the hills, it had the trees, people went there and they called it Paradise because to them it was idyllic. So the town grew. And as the town grew, they didn't pay attention to ingresses and egresses. And I grant you, 42 houses is not a whole town. But 95% of that town burned because they couldn't get out. The fire went through that town at the rate of a football field a second. In 25 hours, the town had burned to the ground. I frankly don't want this to happen to Sierra Madre. And granted, we're only talking 42 houses, but it is in a very severe fire hazard. And whether or not it abuts anything or not, it's in a fire hazard. It has a road. That's all they did up there to improve it. And I'm sorry, it's still a very severe fire hazard. Please understand this. That's why most of us are here. We're frightened. We don't have sidewalks in the northern part of town. They never put them in. I have spent 2 days with Chris Cimino on the phone working out how I went down to my old neighborhood taking pictures of what the city of Pasadena did with, huge roots on camphor trees and everything else to try to get some sidewalks in if we have to have this project. but I'm sorry. This thing should have never gotten off the ground to begin with. It was done during a pandemic when no one could have any input whatsoever, and all of a sudden, we're now having the fait accompli. I am sure Gabe had the right ideas in mind, because I think he was thinking he was doing the right thing by the city. I disagree. I live here. I'm a resident. I'm sorry to be passionate, but that's the kind of a human being I am. So, unlike the city council, you guys have been listening to us. We really, really appreciate that. So, thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for your patience. But we really appreciate what you're doing. But please understand, I'm never going to forget the fact that all of a sudden I realized Lima is an emergency access route because the firefighters were going up and down the street with their trucks. Thank God they could. Thank God the street was wide enough. But I really don't want this project to go through, and I really don't like the idea that just because we don't have an abutment of something, you're not going to consider that field, you know, a very severe fire hazard. It is. Call it what you will, but it's a fire hazard up there. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. My name's Gary Hood, live on North Baldwin. And I want to thank Nancy for the passion in which she brought forward the information about Paradise, California burning to the ground. CAL FIRE is the one who set the high fire rating that we have here in Sierra Madre. It's the same as was in Paradise. So with that said, and I have to compliment everybody who read those thousands of pages. I only had to read a few hundred, and it was difficult to go through. But I did notice something very interesting that I have to bring forward. And I don't know how many of you read through and saw FPP in your reading, or when you go through and you read FPP, it's only explained once in there, but you see FPP a lot. Now, what the heck does FPP mean? FPP is a fire protection plan. Now, interesting, the City of Sierra Madre Attorney, and the Fire Department has accepted the FPP, the Fire Protection Plan. Now, I find that interesting, and the further I read, I thought, my gosh, the Fire Department is responsible for making sure there's brush clearance between the months of April and June. They're also responsible for training the residents on emergency evacuation. They're also responsible for inspecting fire hazards. And that's just the ones I can remember right now as I was writing this down. And I was going to say this to show the council, but I thought that you folks, while you're reading, should be looking for FPP, because this really opens the city up for lawsuits. It opens the fire department up for a big responsibility to make sure that they do all these things. I just can't believe the city attorney would sign off and agree that the fire department and the city is responsible for this FPP. Anyway, you look at it, when you read the plan, fire department is needing to increase their staff by 50%. They only have 10 sworn personnel. There's one firefighter on the engine company. So when this all breaks out, and you figure we got one firefighter doing all of the things that's necessary, first of all, getting in place, the engineer's going to park the rig. There's so many things that go on. We do need more firefighters. But with this project already in an area that CAL FIRE has said is in the same area as Paradise, California, we should really be looking at this with a sharper eye. And I thought it was also interesting in reading that they said that the wind can get up to 74 miles per hour coming out of the canyon. Well, when I looked at it, and I searched it. It was just recently said that the winds will come down the canyons at 96 miles an hour. So when you get low humidity, high winds, and even one of our own fire personnel said, when you get that much wind and that much heat, it doesn't matter how the fire material, protective material that you use is going to stop a fire like that. Obviously, it didn't get stopped in Paradise. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that to your attention, and I want to thank everybody for reading those thousands of pages, and I hope that when you folks go and you look at this, look up FPP and give that some serious thought. And I can't believe our city attorney would agree to our city being that responsible. Thank you.
Thank you. Come on, I've been counting heads.
Long night. Hi, Scott Oliver, 144 West Carter Avenue. I was here last time. There's more people. Everybody's basically saying the same thing. I'm just looking for a little clarification because it's really hard to hear, and you guys talk in terms that are not easily understandable when you only hear certain words. But the bottom line, from what I've been reading, I went to the city rally, or the rally up on the monastery gates, and then I didn't really understand what was going on, and as last time I explained to you guys, I'm just coming down here because my understanding after talking to the city, and I did get the crux of the city staff is recommending that you endorse a zone change. I don't want to ask you questions because you're going to say it's not time for questions. So, but that is what I'm getting. And the zone change, as was explained to me by the city employee, she says, this is the deal. The monastery owns the land. It's zoned industrial. They can build right now, they can build assisted living, but they don't want to. They want to build homes. That's all that was said. She said, so they need a zone change, and it's going to you guys, and you guys are going to consider it, and everybody's putting in all the EIRs and the SEIRs so that everybody can understand and make good calculated endorsements, yay or nay. So as a resident, obviously I just wanted to come down and say, hey, I'm encouraging you to not recommend a zone change. And that'd be it. And I could walk out and go home. I could have done that an hour and a half, 2 hours ago. But I'm trying to keep up, and obviously the affordable housing and the church and the religious overlay. The bottom line that I see this church thing is that they can build the assisted living. And when the city employee spoke to me, she says, you don't want that. It surprised me she was so biased. She says, you know, we're across the street from Kensington. Ambulances all the time, trash trucks, foods. You don't want that. I spent 2 years running books for the library to the British House. I was at the British House every week. The British House, if any of you haven't been on campus, it's a lovely place. It's a great place, especially if you're at the end of your life. So when this employee, and I didn't comment, she said, you don't want that. Kind of got me thinking, why does the city, because that's what I'm reading between the lines, why does the city want all these new, well, why do you think they want? Because the city needs funding to make the city go. We all thought 5 and 10 years ago, we all know, we've been taxed. We pay infrastructure, you too, we pay to live here, we like it, okay? But we all thought it was kind of at that head. Why would we, I mean, didn't the city manager that just left, he got the fire and the police up to reasonable levels of employment? I thought everything was great. Things have been great. Why do we need $2 to $3 million each? Think about the money those houses are going to sell for. Well, why? Of course, because of the taxes and the money they will provide the city. But the city are employees. The community will have to live with the 42 houses and what they get. And so that's just it. If the church can have their institution today, right now, with no problems, what's wrong with that? It's just not enough money? Because that's what this is all about. It's not enough money. We need more money. And we need the city, although we're not going to give you a chance to vote on it. We just want to tell you how this wording can be geared so that you guys can rest your conscience. Because I wouldn't want to be any one of you. I would hate to be any one of you because I know what you're probably up against. And all I can say, I implore you, vote your conscience, your community. This is what it's all about. We have to stop the money. We have to stop it. It's our community. Say no. Say to the city council, as I said last time, you give them a no, we'll deal with the city council. We will deal with that. We did it before with Maranatha. We'll do it again. But we have to take it a step at a time. We need you to do the right thing. There would be nothing better than the planning commission to say,
thank you.
It's not good for the community. It's just not right. So please, do the right thing. Thank you.
Please, if no more clapping, please. If that happens again, and none of that, because I'll just call the meeting. I don't need that. Anybody else want to speak civilly? This is not a rally. It's not a pep rally. Yeah, and there's some respect that needs to be done in this community, so stop it. If everybody's done speaking, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Thank you. really want to be yelling at people on camera, huh? Okay.
All right.
All right. So we're going to bring, hello? We're going to bring back the meeting, started the open discussion with the Planning Commission. Please, everyone, have a seat. I think I'm going to start with maybe some of the questions, or at least start with the first question, the procedural question that we had. At least I have about what happens if the HCD, excuse me, Joe? Hello, in the back? Don't make me treat you like my chihuahua. Okay, so I want to start with the first question about what if HCD rejects whatever we come up with to the city council, whatever they pass to them. I guess that's sort of procedural question. You want to address that, Alex? City attorney?
So if Ms. Warner knows better, she can correct me, but if HCD rejects our housing element, it has to come back to the Planning Commission for us to go through this cycle again to submit it to them. And there could be, as I understand it, if we follow the process and we meet all the deadlines, we're not going to be subject to that 4-year recurring HCD requirement. Instead, we're going to have to go through the process again. But to tell you the truth, it's not clear to me.
I see. Okay. Karen, yeah, you want to go ahead and expound on that?
Sure. So we have resubmitted the element to HCD for a second review. You know, we've gone through their comment letter and, you know, very, very carefully attempted to address all the comments in the letter. They can take up to 60 days to review that. They're about 30 days into it. So we will know before we go back to council for adoption if there are any outstanding comments on the draft element.
Ms. Warner, I think what the chair meant is after council has adopted it,
Right.
after the 90-day review,
Yes.
and let's say HCD denies it after the 90-day review, then what happens?
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is going into the council adoption hearing, we will know if there's any outstanding issues. And if those are not addressed, and HCD reviews the adopted element, and there's still a comments and the city's element is out of compliance, then the city can choose to go back and attempt to address those comments.
Okay. So, but in general, since we'll have that review, chances are whatever we forward to the council, they will already have those changes, and it's unlikely that they will then make changes, or you know, unless we make some radical changes at city council, that they would then reject what,
Right.
if we're doing everything that we're to be in
They
compliance.
wouldn't have any new comments in reviewing the adopted element.
Okay, so that's as far as the processes go. Okay.
So another way of looking at this is that they already had aspects of the report that they did reject, and we've worked with them to remediate those.
Yes, there's so many new requirements now, and the standard of review is very high. So while we think we've addressed them, it's really impossible to know. All I can say is the cities down in the San Diego region that are about a year ahead of us, many are still struggling to get their elements in compliance.
But I think as the city attorney said, if we submit on time in a good faith attempt to meet the requirements, we might get bounced back and have some corrections, but we're not going to have the punitive measures that if we just blow it off and say, yeah, we're not adopting this, right? I mean, that's really the bottom line.
You won't have the 4-year cycle because you will definitely adopt before February 15th. You would unlikely have punitive measures, but you know, there's always the chance of litigation.
What a happy thought.
Anybody, any other questions? I sort of have another one, unless you wanted to expound on that. the language that's being, there's been several questions asking about the language that's been changed, that seems to be the crux of most of what the objection to the this EIR amongst the whole thing. They want to just throw it out. But I mean, this HCC code where we're changing the language, can we just go through how we got there? Because to me, what I heard initially is what John was talking about, is that we don't have definitions in our general plan, so that the wording had to be changed, that there wasn't anything cagey going on. That's what I hear from the public. So I just want to address that, and maybe we could go through that process, or at least go through the definitions of how we changed the language.
So earlier, one of the public commenters said that she had brought it to the city's attention that this provision, and we weren't aware. It's true, because what she said is that that this provision exists in the general plan. Are you folks aware of it? And we weren't aware of it because it's not in the general plan yet. It's something to be adopted. So when we went back and searched the general plan for that specific term, we couldn't find it, which is what we reported back to her. When we reviewed this language, when it was drafted by our consultant, we didn't see anything wrong with it, because we understood undeveloped land to mean not natural open space. So undeveloped land and natural open space in our minds were the same thing, but they were being interpreted differently by members of the public. And so we saw that different interpretation, and we wanted to correct it ahead of time. Because we didn't want there to be a situation where this gets adopted, and then we're going to have the hearings on the monastery, and then there was going to be a fight about that later, and there was going to be misinterpretations or misunderstandings about what that provision actually means. So we thought the best way to proceed is to fix it now, so that staff can clarify what the consultant and staff had understood that provision to mean from the beginning, so that there wasn't any confusion. And so that's the genesis of it, really.
Okay.
And so we tried to pull language from the general plan, because the term undeveloped isn't a term in the general plan, but natural open space is. So to clarify, we took that natural open space language and we put it in there to provide greater clarity for everybody else as to what we're actually talking about here.
So, if this is giving us consternation at this point, is this something that needs to be included at this time in order to get this passed and comply with the HCD time requirements? Or is this something that can be updated after if there's still confusion? Well, so I guess I have three questions. One, does it have to be adopted now? Two, can it be changed and still submitted? And what happens if we don't adopt it right now?
I was going to say that the Planning Commission is always free to amend the language that staff has proposed. So if the Planning Commission wanted to wordsmith it from the day of state, they definitely can. And they can recommend it as amended. The safety element is intended to be adopted with the housing element, which is just another element of the general plan. While staff understands that we could probably separate out the ordinance and the general plan, it's probably best to keep the general plan together, because HCD will be reviewing the general plan in its entirety. And to the extent there are, I just wanted to note, to the extent there are concerns about fire safety issues with respect to that safety element, this safety element, with these changes, has already been sent to CAL FIRE, and CAL FIRE is reviewing it. And CAL FIRE has told us that they're going to have edits back to us before the City Council considers this housing element and the safety element. So we're going to have CAL FIRE opining on whether or not this safety element meets the requirements. So in short, Commissioner, I think, or Vice Chair rather, I think it's best probably to keep the general plan together. The ordinances can probably be separated out.
If I could piggyback on that, it's my understanding that we're amending these other elements because state law says that we have to update these other elements when we're doing these things. So it's sort of like, it's not required by HCD, but because we're requiring some elements, we have to update these. So I don't think HCD is looking at the wording on this, right? So we can change the wording and it's not gonna put at risk our HCD application, but we have to do it at the same time because of some other state law.
Right, because if you revised so many aspects, then you had to update your safety plan as well.
Right.
Right.
Is
Yeah, I
it-
remember that.
Is it then, once again, is it possible to come back and refine some of the definitions in that? Because I think that's leading to a lot of consternation in the community as about what is considered abutted and what is considered undeveloped.
Yes, so we can refine it on the dais today. If we have further thoughts, we can let the city council know, and the city council can refine it further before it's adopted. And yes, always we can amend the general, any element of the general plan and any provision of the general plan at a future time. We can always do it, yes.
Because I think those terms are causing, I think one of the problems is I think they're only looking at it in terms of one development. Whereas, we look at the entire city. And there are other parts of the city where there are places to build that are on pads that are already there, but could be considered to be unabutted and undeveloped. I'm thinking number 1 Carter.
Or the lot that's next to the Pyramid House.
Or the lot that's connected to the Pyramid House, or even if you go over further on Liliano, there are lots there that are unabutted and undeveloped. And by adopting, if we decide this is the standard, we're also denying other people their right to build on property that is already there and zoned for their use. So, I mean, I don't want to get so myopic that we only look at all of our land use in terms of what's happening at the monastery. Because I think we do that, I think, I think we're laying ourselves open for some bad results. So I think how we define unabutted and undeveloped is going to be crucial to how this works in terms of how it fits with Sierra Madre's hillside.
I would add, I think the term we use is unimproved. We
Unimproved.
took out undeveloped, and I think we
Yeah, and so what are our definitions of that? And we can probably come up with something.
But I think one thing that, I think we need to understand how general plans work, and they're general. This is an objective. It's not a hard and fast standard. So when you look at whether a project is in compliance with the general plan, you look at the totality of the general plan. And this says avoid. It doesn't say you cannot. It's just, you read all of these parts together and you say, is this project? And so I think the way I read, as a real estate lawyer who, if I had a infill project that was potentially undeveloped or unimproved, and whether it abutted or not, I would say, look, that's, just one property surrounded by others. It can be approved or denied, whichever one of these readings we have. And I don't read either one of these readings as either an approval or a denial of the monastery, because that's really what a lot of people are after, or an infill project, some of the ones we're talking about, or otherwise. So I think people are making a much too big a deal about wordsmithing when you have to look at the whole safety element as a whole and the whole general plan as a whole. So.
Would it be possible for me to join in the conversation?
We've closed it. I'm afraid to do that because then it's going to open up to everybody else.
But the gentleman is referring to comments that I made, and I feel like the conversation now is related to comments that I've made that are being misinterpreted and are not addressing the issue.
All right, I'm going to allow this one thing, and that's it. I don't want anybody else to come up and sedge way, please.
Okay,
Go
I greatly
ahead.
appreciate it. I'm trying to clarify what my concerns were with regard to the conversation we had with the safety policy. When I agree that you have to look at the document as a whole, and I did that, and what I looked at and what I saw was that what had been changed was they took out the avoiding building and higher fire safety zones. What they added was they were clarifying, saying, we're going to clarify to exclude existing development applications. So before, we came to the city leaders and said, look, this monastery development, it conflicts with this policy of avoiding development in high fire severity zones. And what they did in response was to change the policy so that it excluded existing development. So we're saying, okay, well, we're going to exclude the monastery, and we're going to change the wording so that it now refers to new development. That's what I'm saying, is that they're changing the safety element language to allow this monastery to be built in this high fire severity zone by choosing to call it a pending project, and like I said, clearly changing the language to say excluding existing development applications, so that it only applies then to avoid construction of new development on land. So that's what I object to. I think we should, what I would offer as a solution to this problem for now, anyway, if it won't, even if it will, I just think we should stick with the avoid expanding development into undeveloped areas in very high fire severity zone. That was the objective that was proposed to deal with the problem of the Bobcat fire. That's how we came up with that. And so to now say, well, we're going to change that to allow this pending project, and after we sat there and said, this is our concern, that's what leads to the lack of trust, and I think it's dishonest then to say, well, what we're going to do then is we're going to fudge this language. We're going to say, well, okay, it doesn't apply to we're going to exclude existing development applications.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I'm not sure it makes sense to you. Good. You want to? I don't want to really much of a dialogue, but
No, I'm happy to comment when we're deliberating.
Yeah, why don't you just sit and we'll deliberate? I think you've made yourself clear. I just want to be able to make this deliberations between us without having to have something else. If we want to change it or accept the older definition. What I hear from you is you like the old definition even though it's ambiguous and doesn't meet the definitions within our.
Well, it's not that it's ambiguous, it's that they specifically changed it.
Well, that's what you suspect. What I'm saying is they changed it to
I know that.
match.
It's a fact. They changed it. We had a conversation with them and they changed the policy. That's a fact.
Well, that's not, they changed the language to meet accepted definitions within the general plan because of the objections. That's what I heard.
They asked us to send the policy over to them, and then they read it and they changed it.
Okay. That's fine.
We got to understand that we can't do this kind of dialogue that we'd have, sitting around a campfire talking about things. We have to follow the Brown Act rules and the way public hearings work. And we've taken public comment, and now we need to stop, and now we need to deliberate. And those are the rules we have to follow.
All right. Go ahead if you want to expound on what you had to say.
No, I mean,
You're done.
I'm done with that. I think that, I can address more of that later, I suppose.
All right. I mean, do you want, I'm just saying, if we have to come up with different language, my understanding was that we were looking at the definitions within the general plan, that there wasn't any hanky-panky. We're just trying to use terms that everybody already knows and are well-defined, and that the suspect that they were doing it on purpose for some specific ulterior motive, I didn't see that, and I didn't see that in the discussion or even in the words. So if we want to leave that for the code to change definitions later on, we can leave that open, I suppose. But I just didn't see it as being some kind of nefarious, ploy, other than just trying to clear up the language because we had objections to the way things were stated in the definition that was pointed out later. Even though, as the city attorney said, he understood the language as it was, but we changed it to try and comply with the objections we got from public comment, correct? Okay. So, anybody have any other questions?
Well, I guess, what are we recommending? Are we recommending to leave it as is? Are we recommending to?
Well, I would like to amend some things in there, but to me, I think the fundamental issue we need to talk about is we're talking about the housing element, not the monastery. We have a huge other one for the monastery, and we're gonna have meetings on that, and we're gonna talk about all of that then. But I don't want to lose sight of what we're doing tonight, which is the housing element. So in due course, let's talk about that. But I think we should talk about what we care about the housing element first. And then when we get to that part, you know, we could talk about it. I'm not a fan of the abutting natural open space clause. That doesn't seem to do anything for me. And I didn't understand a stated policy reason for adding that. So I'd like to strike that. The rest of it I think is fine. But again, I just said I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, and now I'm doing it. So I'm going to stop on that point, and we can come back to it.
I agree. We have a deadline to meet for the city in terms of getting the housing element in, and being diverted by. We will be doing these meetings for another year on the monastery, but we need to get the housing element in. Otherwise, the city will be punished for us being late. And most of the discussion I've heard tonight seems to be very relevant to the development at the monastery. It is less obvious that it's relevant for the entire city. And right now, I'd like to work on the documents that are relevant to the entire city.
You want to lead us off?
Hmm?
I said, you want to lead us off on that?
No.
Oh, I'll be happy to start then if you don't want to. I think we need to understand that we're updating the housing element because it's required by the state. And the timeline is required by the state. I was on the General Plan Update Committee. We took forever. We went very carefully. We took tons of public comment. We had public meetings. I'm really proud of our General Plan Update. But we don't get to just have our general plan. In the state, in all its wisdom, has decided we need to do this. So we can like that or not like that, but that's what it is. And we need to move the housing element, and we need to move it on the state's timeline. This is not the monastery. This is not One Carter. The EIR for this project is not approving or denying those, and has no power to do so. I think that putting the monastery as informational in the EIR is helpful because it shows the setting. I do think from a language perspective, the word proposed project is better than pending, because I don't even know if it's proposed, because we haven't even received an application yet, right? So maybe contemplated is the better word, but pending is the wrong word, because it hasn't been approved, it hasn't even been submitted. So maybe we should change the language from pending to proposed, or maybe even contemplated. I mentioned before, I think the abutting language isn't helpful, but otherwise I think the safety element update is really good, and I think it adds a lot. Also, we heard that this EIR is not very well written. EIRs are not novels. They're horrible reading. I've read many of them. This is pretty good for EIR, Wyatt. I've never read a good EIR.
I'll take your word for it.
That doesn't put you to sleep at night. But it does what it's supposed to do, that puts forth the issues and lets us chew on them. With regard to the church sites and the overlay, and whether the churches want those, it would have been my preference that we did an overlay on all the church properties, and then down the line, if they change their mind or want them, they can have them. It's entirely optional. So if the churches don't want this, they don't build it. It's fine. It doesn't hurt their values. It doesn't change their right to use their property as a church. But then we were told we'd have to amend the EIR to do that, and we're on the state's timeline. So we got the list that we have. I think that to the extent there's a concern with HCD, that they might say we need more, not less, on that. I also think we've heard about, again, I think we shouldn't do any of the zoning tonight. We shouldn't adopt the zoning code, the text amendments for the R320, R330, or religious overlay. And we shouldn't adopt the map that changes those zonings, because if we don't adopt the zonings, they don't exist, so we can't change them to them. I think we should table all of that so we can look at it. I have a lot of ideas on that, but I'd really prefer to take that a little slower. I think a year is enough time. We can get that done. And I think some of the ideas we heard about form-based zoning could be very helpful in that, especially because we have to move to objective standards where we don't get to have a design review. And so if we have, like, here's a picture, you can build it, it's a lot better than you can build anything you want. So I think that would be helpful, but I'd be very much in favor of hunting the zoning. Also, keep in mind with regard to downtown, we're working within the constraints of Measure V, so that limits what we can do there. Obviously, I think the housing element, we should recommend the housing element to the city council. I think it's good. I think it's, again, we're making choices that we have to make. We're choosing sort of the least worst, and I think the fact that we can get out of or avoid a third story in most cases is very good. But I hope that by refining the zoning, we can even work on that better and make that better. I'm not a huge fan of getting rid of the second story setback. That's for another day. The other elements I think are fine. I think the EAR does a decent job of notifying us and informing us of the impacts involved in the update of the housing element and the other elements. It doesn't do a good job at all of talking about the monastery, but because that's not its job. And we have a big fat other one to look at on that.
So, I agree that the housing element needs to go forward, and I'm prepared to vote on that tonight. The religious overlay zone and what's in that, remember, that's all aspirational. It may or may not be built. We're looking to be permissive, and we're looking to assure the state that if somebody wants to build some affordable housing, that we've already planned on it and we have a place for it and we've thought about it. So, in my heart of hearts, I don't think a lot of it pencils out for the city of Sierra Madre. And I don't think we have all the infrastructure for some of the affordable housing, but we have to tell the state that we've thought about it and that that the option is there. So it's not as if this stuff is gonna show up, Monday morning. So I'm not overly concerned about that. I do believe on the zoning that we should think about some of the stuff that's in there and maybe dig a little deeper. I'm not always quite comfortable. Some of the other stuff that came up tonight, somebody mentioned a fault zone. This whole town is on a fault zone. In 71, we had an earthquake that came through here and took out a lot of chimneys and stuff like that. So objecting to things because they're on the fault zone, that's kind of a hard sell, because you're going to have to rebuild a lot of houses. We've already been through the URM problem in downtown. The language for the high fire zone, yes, I think it can be more specific and be more clear so that people understand exactly what you're talking about. I think there is a place for that, because I think there will be pressure. I think there will be ongoing pressure in this city to build further and further up into the hills, and that's an area where you can draw that line and be specific about it. But I'm not sure that you can. But you have to look at the entire city when you make this comment. So there's the monastery, which everyone is here to concern about, is only at one end of the city. It goes all the way over to Santa Anita, and there are many lots that are in worse, in a much more precarious position. And if you decide to enforce it there, you're going to have a lot of problems with a lot of other places. And so, one of the problems that we have on this commission is we have to look at the city as a whole. It's not just about one development. So if you want to make rules, the rules you have to think about how it's going to be applied across the line. But I'm more than prepared to vote on the housing element tonight.
I agree about voting on the housing element. I thought I'd heard that there was some part of the religious overlay that we had to vote on now, but if not, because that's all zoning code that can be done within a year, then even better.
We would have to vote on that. It's just an overlay. It's not. So no, we would want to retain the overlay zone as part of this because we rely heavily to meet our RENA numbers on that. By not doing that, it jeopardizes the ability to capture the number of units that we need.
And so help me understand what exactly the overlay governs. Does it, is it
Religious
just,
overlay zone?
The religious.
Only the religious overlay zone.
Right.
Okay.
and so all we're saying is that those locations are going to have zoning as we determine later.
Right.
It's not saying that there's a certain zoning that is being ascribed to them. All it's saying is that they are included in.
Yes.
Okay.
It's simply an overlay.
Yeah. So I think I'm okay with the overlay being voted on as well, because we're not gonna get what we had hoped for of including everywhere and letting them decide.
Yeah, but I guess I'm not clear on what we're saying we're gonna be okay with. The concept that we're gonna have this is fine, but the actual zoning code that adopts it, I'm not good with. I think we really need to put some design standards in so that when people build stuff based on it, it works.
And that's what we were suggesting, maintain the overlay, but the ordinance itself, we would still, that was part of the original recommendation, was we would look at that, including the R3 sites, some of the concepts that we looked at today, separately, where we can have further dialogue and come up with development standards for those sites.
So what does the overlay allow? I guess here's the thing. Could somebody pull, after this is adopted, could somebody pull an application under the overlay as we approve it? Because if they can, then I'm not in favor of it. If we're just saying this is where it's gonna go, then I'm all good, and we're gonna adopt all the necessary zoning and other stuff to make that happen within a year and 8 days, then I'm good with that. But if somebody could come in like 2 days after we approve this and pull one with no development guidelines or standards, because guidelines don't matter anymore, yeah, then I got serious heartburn.
Yeah, I don't see how staff could possibly process that application, so I don't think that would go forward at all. So the designation would exist, but the application couldn't be processed without some kind of zoning development standard.
So we're gonna designate in the general plan, but we're not gonna adopt the zoning.
Correct.
Okay, I'm good with that.
Okay, I can do that, yeah.
Okay, so with that, I'm okay, and thank you for that clarification.
Yes.
I am glad that Commissioner Spears brought up so eloquently the concern of designating an entire city based on one property. That we don't have that luxury.
Right.
And so I think that being able to come up with the right guidance for that is the right one. And I think that Commissioner Hutt brings up a great point that we're supposed to be looking at the entire general plan in its entirety. No project ticks every box, and you have to say, does the majority of these tick the right boxes that it fits in town or doesn't? And so I don't know where we netted out on if we're leaving the wording as is, if we were going to wordsmith it some more, or what ended up with that. But I think that ensuring we come up with language that fits for all of the potential lots that this could apply to is critically important. I think that as drafted, it doesn't fit everywhere right now.
I agree.
And this is the housing element that we're working on right now.
Yes.
But I am prepared to push the housing element forward to City Council. I guess the surgical changes to some of the descriptions of the development, are we able to make those recommendations on the SEIR?
The development? Sorry, I didn't understand.
So, Commissioner Hutt had thought about using the word contemplated rather than.
Oh.
Are we able to change the SEIR as we accept it?
Well, within the housing element, it uses both the word pending and proposed, but I could easily change it in the housing element to only refer to the monastery as a proposed project.
And that wouldn't cause HCD
No,
any
no,
action?
no, no,
Okay.
not at all, not at all.
So I would certainly recommend that.
Well, I agree. I don't, you guys have more than added to this than I can add, but because I saw the EIR as a separate, this one hang-up issue was definitional as far as I was concerned. I didn't see anything nefarious going on. And I think being able to separate some of the zoning change things that we're gonna do is the right move, because, yeah, I mean, my proposal, I think way back in January when we talked about something like this, was to do something with the ADL law. And, that is impossible. We're dealing with what the state is sticking us with, which is what everybody's been saying. And Karen has to be the wizard to figure out where this is going. I don't think anybody's happy putting these into churches. And even if the churches said, we don't have any intent on doing that, to me, that's the same as saying, well, the people who are never going to build an ADU, even if it qualifies, would be the same kind of thing. In some ways, it might be an advantage to even trying to put it even in a downtown area, which is more problematic because we have 23013. So I can move forward on it with the way the definitions you guys have put up, and just say the zoning for later, so we can, take the time to do that properly. And the Meadows project to me is a completely separate issue, and I'd rather get to that rather than try and head it off with something like this, which we're obligated to through state mandates, which we have no choice over. So, does anybody, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, one other point that I wanted to make was, with regards to the religious overlay. If there's anything that we've seen in the real estate market over the last 2 years, it's the possibility that things could change rapidly, and that it's not feasible today doesn't mean that in 7.5 years, when this is still the policy,
Right.
it wouldn't be then, right? This is an 8-year plan. And so providing more options is better than locking them into less and jeopardizing losing a community member like that because we haven't, I mean, we've seen that, everything we've done since I've been on the commission, and you all did it well before I got here, was to make it easier for people to come into this town and revitalize the downtown and have good use. And that's what this does.
Right.
It allows for more possibilities and alternatives for these local important places to be around. And so I think that regardless of how they feel about it today, this is a better option.
Yeah, I agree entirely, and I think we need to understand the optionality of it, because we saw design massing studies, and also massing studies always look ugly because they're just big blocks, they're not houses. But for tax credit deals, right? And for tax credit deals, you got to maximize, and you got to do a lot of stuff, and I can understand why a church might not want to do that. But we also talked about, and although we didn't get any massing studies, like a church adding a small bungalow court where they don't have to go out and get, some big nonprofit developer to help them out, and they just build it for, church personnel or teachers. And that's the kind of thing that I think would just totally fit into town. And I think that, I understand HCD likes to drive their numbers, and they think like everywhere's LA, but I think that's more realistic for what we could do. And I think that would actually achieve the goals of what a lot of this housing affordability stuff is about making it possible for people who, might not be mega millionaires and want to buy a $2 to $3 million house to live in town, right? And whether they're a teacher or church personnel or something like that, I think that's a great option. And I'm really glad that we've included that.
And, change is inevitable, and the state is driving change at an incredible pace. You know, they're coming up every year with new rules that to change what housing looks like in the state of California. And it's up to us to try to manage that change so that it doesn't, you know, we don't lose control of whatever Sierra Madre is. And that's why we have to look at the whole city, and we have to think about all the ramifications of any kinds of change. So, yeah, but, you know, we try to be more deliberative. We try to at least think about things in terms of the entire city.
All right.
Well,
Anybody know how to word the?
well, do we want to look? I guess maybe let's talk about the wordsmithing that we want to do. Do we all agree that we want to change the references to the monastery/meadows in the housing element and in the EIR from pending to either proposed or contemplated? Do we care if it's either one of those, or do we want contemplated or pending or proposed? I don't like pending. I really don't like that.
Pending implies it's on a timeline. I'd do contemplated, because we haven't even seen their proposal in terms of, you know, hard paper yet. We've seen a lot of pie in the sky stuff, and to the public, we want your comments, because whatever you're saying today is going to influence whatever happens down the line. It's just not going to happen today.
Okay, I'm good with contemplated. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
And then
Less specific. Sure.
on the language regarding the
Where are we?
the one objective, do we want to leave it the way it currently is, revert back to where it was prior, or somewhere in between? I sort of like the way it is, but strike out the clause abutting natural open space, because I don't understand why, if it's, I really think undeveloped and unimproved are the same. If it's in the high fire zone, it's in the high fire zone. I don't care necessarily what it's next to.
And then go back in and change our definitions, perhaps?
I don't think there's really.
Because we don't have a specific, I mean, part of this came up because we didn't have a specific definition,
Yeah.
City Attorney?
Yeah, so we were trying to address what staff understood it to mean and what the public understood it to mean. And so if we use an undefined term, the concern is that someone's going to have one interpretation and we're going to have another. Now, generally it's the city council or staff's interpretation at the time it's adopted that carries the most weight in court, but we were just trying to avoid a confusion in the future when you know, these issues come up in the future, as they will. For example, in the monastery case, it's going to come up, so we're trying to avoid this confusion.
Yeah, but I guess if we're talking about the issue between a piece of land and whether it's unimproved, undeveloped, or natural open space, like, that's one issue, right? And picking the right term there. But then there's this other thing of abutting natural open space, and that to me seems like a different concept, and I don't see the policy need for that. That's what I'm saying, and so I would just prefer to strike that. And then I guess I'm pretty ambivalent about the other term, because to me they seem interchangeable, and policy 7 or H, whatever we number this thing, I don't think this is, whether that thing is called undeveloped or unimproved, is going to change any application anywhere. But so whichever one you all want there, I just would be happy if we struck that one clause.
Yeah. Do you think the language of taking out the word abutted changes the definition if we just change the word to a definition that we already have in our definitions?
Well, I think there's been enough discussion in the record today to clarify what staff understood that term to mean. And as I understand it, if the Planning Commission adopts unimproved, they're also understanding it to mean that, you know, if it's unimproved, should be synonymous with natural open space. Is that the Planning Commission's understanding? Because, like, for example, if in the monastery example, to make it plain, if the land has been graded and that's not unimproved land, that's not undeveloped land.
Yeah, if you
Because
go,
it's not natural open space.
if you go over to Liliano and go all the way to the top above where the Heflin property is, there's some lots there that are, they've been partially graded and they can be built on, but they abut the wildland natural open space where nothing has ever been done.
Mhm.
And see, that's the line that I'm kind of concerned with.
Mhm.
Because I think when you put development up against that, you're asking for, without a lot of other mitigating activity, you are asking for problems.
Mhm.
Whereas if you could have a lot in the middle of town that's undeveloped and unimproved because it's got weeds on it, and there's one behind the city hall right now. But that's a different, for a fire, as a firefighter, that's a totally different event. So I would like to at least understand that things that are next to wildland, untouched wildland is of greater concern than things that are more removed.
Staff's open to alternatives. So if the commission has an alternative way to word it.
So, Bob, what you're saying about those lots on Liliana, let's use that as an example. Are you saying that the lots that have been graded and made into pads before, but have then gone fallow, you're okay with those being developed, but the natural open space that's next to it, you wouldn't want that
Right.
going. I'm there with you on that.
Yeah,
That's my understanding as well.
Okay, so that's what the abutted comes out then.
Yeah,
is what
so
you're saying. Okay.
we cross the clause abutted natural open space, that comes out. And then I got a couple of other little typos, and I can give these to staff. One is, there's just a column that's not added up right, and on a description of Site 4, it talks about the architect explored the feasibility of development of up to 19 multifamily units, and I think that means a development of 19 multifamily units per acre, because that site is really small, and there's no way somebody talked about putting 19 units on that. So I'd like to incorporate these. I can pass these down.
Sure. All right, very good.
All right, so then,
So are we good?
I think so, but I'm gonna make sure the city attorney keeps me honest on this. I move, I move that we recommend that the city council adopt General Plan Amendment 21-03 to adopt the 2021 through 2029 housing element update, including updates to the land use, safety, and circulation elements as edited at the dais. And
Subsequent environmental impact report.
the certification of the subsequent environmental impact report. And then was one of those other amendments strictly the overlay?
Not an amendment.
Or, I'm sorry, is zone change 2103 the overlay? That is strictly the overlay?
No.
No, the designation's in the general plan, right?
It's in the general plan. Okay, so we've got it covered. Great.
So and I think we should be express and say, we recommend that the city council do not adopt at this time municipal code text amendment 2104 and zone change 2103, and complete those within the 1 year, or it'll be less than 1 year by the time they adopt it, timeline as required by HCD. And bring that back to us so we can get going on that.
Yes.
I will second that motion.
Okay, do you want me to state it again?
No, I think.
All right. I move that we adopt General Plan Amendment 21-03 to adopt the 2021 through 2029 housing element update, including updates to the land use, safety, and circulation elements, as well as the certification of the subsequent environmental impact report. And that the planning commission,
Changes. With the
sorry, with the changes as edited,
It does.
and that the planning commission recommend the city council not adopt municipal code text amendment 21-05, zone change 21-03, and prioritize those for the planning commission to analyze and recommend changes within
1 year.
the time period.
Yeah.
Now can we second it?
I hope so.
Second.
Wait, go ahead.
Sorry to ask, but 2104 wasn't addressed, so amendment 2104.
Yeah, you said 2105, but I think you meant.
Yeah, I think you mean.
Oh, I said 21-16 municipal code. That was the resolution?
So there's the amendment 2104 and 2105.
Yeah, 2104.
We recommend nothing other than
No municipal code
no
text
mun-
amendments.
no municipal code amendments at this time, and that the city council prioritize those for the planning commission to develop. Thank you.
I'll make sure I know what I'm gonna vote on.
405.
Okay.
Second?
Yeah, second.
Okay. We have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Against? It passes unanimously. Thank you. Phew. Okay, very good. That brings us to Planning Commission reports. Anybody have anything to bring up, report?
None for me.
Bob?
2 weeks, we have the
Trail
big
race?
Sierra Madre community event, Mount Wilson Trail Race. At least 3 people at the dais are gonna run it. You? No? Oh, you're up north, that's right.
Running out of town. Okay.
Good luck to everybody who's running,
Yeah, well,
especially
there'll be
team
3 people on the trail,
City of Zero.
going up and back.
But got anything else? No?
Nothing to report.
No, nothing to report. I want to bring up something for Councilmember Parkhurst. It's not necessarily a report, but we've had a coyote problem, especially up where I live. My dog was attacked in my front yard. Neighbors have had this happen. So as if you guys don't have enough trouble, I would like maybe the city council to address a solution, or at least solutions, reasonable solutions for the residents who are affected. Laguna Beach has done it in the past, and not just because my dog got attacked. I mean, it's been happening, and I see them running every morning and whatnot. I've had a friend surrounded up at Bailey Canyon with her 2 dogs, and they didn't run away, and one of them growled at her, and she turned around because there was 5. And so, anyway, and with that, I don't want to belabor the point, but there's, the things that neighbors can do, in terms of what they can defend themselves with. I'd like them to maybe reintroduce or relook at some of the restrictions we have for deterrence. And I'm not talking about firearms, but like things that people can use that are technically illegal. I mean, you can't even brandish a toy gun in town without getting an infraction. But if you want to use something as a deterrent, I'd like maybe the police department to chime in on that and what they consider, because there can be language for safety and responsibility, just like there are other things, shocking poles, airsoft guns, whatever. Because I've had people say things against it, and I don't want to be in violation because my neighbor turns me in because I'm chasing off coyotes from my front yard or something like that, with what I might be, pending to do. All right. Anyway, I wanted to bring it up because it came up. Sorry. I know you guys have enough headaches, but appreciate it.
The one thing I will say is I know that the Environment, Energy, and Natural Resources Committee is working on a wildlife watch program, and they've been working on it most of this year. So
Good.
I will take that. I will take that and see if we can't get it agendized.
Okay, because we've called the police department, and they refer, that's who your liaison is for animal control, Animal control basically doesn't have anything to do with it. So it's really up to the city and the residents. Thank you. Tom? No? Okay. Go ahead.
So the planning commission had asked previously, and it was offered by our interim city manager, Jose Reynoso, if you were interested in taking a tour of the water facilities. So we've asked Jose when that time frame is possible, and he was saying like on a Wednesday or Thursday, anytime between 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So what we're asking is what would be your preferred day and possible time frame on a Wednesday or Thursday between 10 and 2.
Are we all going en masse, or we're scheduling our windows?
I think we would probably have to notice this as a special meeting of the planning commission as a tour. So going all together.
So if we don't go all together, then we're in better shape. Easier.
It's easier, but it depends on Jose Reynoso's availability as well. Trying to do a tour multiple times throughout the day, I would leave that decision up to him as well.
Can you send us some possible dates and we'll just pick them and go that way?
Yes.
Or vice versa, if you want to send me some possible dates, and then I can kind of coordinate that, if that would help.
Yeah, if you send me a reminder to do that.
I will send out a reminder.
I'll agree to anything now, but it's 10:30 and, tomorrow's a new day.
Put a reminder to send you a reminder.
Thank you.
I can just tell you, well, I don't know how Peggy's gonna, but for me, the later the better, because I'm working those 2 days. I could schedule the afternoon off or something if it's important enough, but I've been pretty busy lately. So Wednesday, Thursday is tough for me. So at 2 o'clock or the closer to 2, like I can work a morning that I can come and do it, because I'd be very interested in seeing it.
Okay. Also, I know you're going to be very disappointed, but I am proposing to cancel the October 21st meeting, which would be in 2 weeks. We have no items on that agenda. Unless you wanted to continue a discussion about
educational stuff.
The institutional.
About the what?
About all the ordinances that we're postponing.
I think we'd be better off having the city council give us direction first, because I don't want to go out on a limb. We've done that before. Sometimes it doesn't work so well. And also, we might want to attend some of the city council meetings that the housing element is being considered, so we can answer any questions. So I think we've got a pretty full plate.
Yeah, actually, will you send us the dates that the planning commission, that the housing element will be sent to city council?
So, and that will be going to city council on October 26th and possibly November 9th.
At one point, there was hope that we could find another date for an extra meeting. Was that in case we needed?
Yes, if we were not able to come to make a recommendation this evening, then we would probably have a joint study session with the council.
And then there was something that we wanted to get prioritized for us that we were going to have to delay because we did our last educational session. Do any of you remember what that was?
Fire? You mean regarding fire and water?
The key issues.
Yeah.
Was it the key issues?
The key issues. So I've managed to, and that was part of the reason why I was trying to do that on October 21st. As soon as we can get to that with both consultants, the city consultant, third-party review, as well as the environmental consultant for the traffic and circulation. So that is going to occur on November 4th.
Okay.
The traffic and circulation
Yes,
on November 4th.
on November 4th.
Good. And who's going to be making the presentation?
That'll be DUDEC, their consultant, LLG, is their traffic consultant. The sub-consultant will be making that presentation. And we'll also have the MIG, third-party review, their consultant, traffic consultant, participating and answering questions as well.
And traffic seemed to be a pretty strong sticking point with a number of the citizens that presented. Would the consultant be able to respond to some of their concerns about width of roads and things like that?
Yes.
And then would that in turn have bearing on the developer's input to us when they present us with the project?
It could, yes.
Excellent.
Oh, does the county own the Bailey Canyon Park?
That is owned by the county.
Flood control.
So
It was put in by flood control when they put in the basin.
So we don't own any of that, okay. Because it seems like, I suppose if we owned it, there would be more flexibility, but, okay.
So that concludes my report.
Very good. Thank you.
There were,
Go ahead.
sorry, I thought that city attorney was gonna work on, preparing information for us about SB 9 and SB 10.
Oh, you're so eager. Vice Chair.
I get asked this question on the street as I'm walking.
You can't stay in Starbucks for more than 2 minutes.
No.
And
I've taken to ordering from the app so that I don't have to have a conversation about SB 9 and 10, so.
I'm happy to provide a presentation whenever you'd like. I'm actually, a memo was actually drafted for the city staff. I need to have a conversation with city staff first as to what I think the implications are to the city. That conversation is going to be happening next week. Did you say next week?
Mm-hmm.
Next week, before the city council meeting. So after I have that conversation, then I'm happy to put together a presentation to present at this whenever you would like at your planning commission meeting.
Can we do AB 602 as well?
Yes, we can address any. If you have a list, I don't know that we'll get through all of them because they're all SB 8, SB 9 are the two I'm going to really cover. Those are the ones that have the biggest implication for the city, in my opinion. But there are a number of other housing bills. Just last week, 27 affordable housing bills were adopted. And not all of them are relevant to the city. So, you can discount a lot of those. But still, our office is looking through and we're combing through to see what in those 27 bills is relevant. Those 27 bills don't even include SB 8, 9, and 10 that were already adopted. Right? So that's 27 other bills that we're reviewing related to affordable housing.
We talked before about the, when the general plan map and the zoning map were brought in consistency, there was an issue of whether we go up or down on some that were inconsistent. And we talked about, well, maybe even though we went down, we could switch back up. But there might be environmental review required. But we might think that under SB 10, we might be able to move those back up without doing environmental review. Because I think every single one of those properties is pretty small. So it's something to think about.
Noted.
Very good.
So, sorry, when would we like to agendize that discussion, just so I can be prepared?
Well, it sounds like November 2nd is going to be a short night, so maybe that's okay.
Yeah.
Would you be able to do it for October 21st? 2 weeks?
Yes.
So we don't have a canceled meeting.
If that's what the planning commission
We're
wants.
back on the 21st. Excellent. That's good.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand this because, people do want to know. And they ask us, which is sort of a foolhardy thing,
Are you
so
gonna
we
try to
should
do
at
all
least
three?
have some information.
AB 602?
We haven't seen this level of change in the last 15 years. I mean, the pace is dramatic.
It's been great for us junior attorneys because the seniors have no idea what's going on either, so they're on par with us.
I don't think my entire lifetime. Jeez Louise.
Yep.
All right, very good. So we're adjourning the meeting to the 21st then?
Yes.
Okay. So then we will adjourn Planning Commission's meeting to October 21st.
Great, thank you.